Stars twinkling in space, a sweeping, majestic arpeggio, a girl holding a basket of flowers, and we're zooming out, and we're zooming out. These are the first images of Final Fantasy VII. It's one hell of a way to make a first impression, that's for sure. I dimly recall the hype that surrounded the game's release in November of '97, seeing huge spreads in magazines and thinking how insane and just oh my god crazy it all looked, and that I needed to play this game. It didn't even matter that there'd apparently been 6 other Final Fantasy games before this that I'd never even heard of because they never came out in Europe. For all intents and purposes, this was the first Final Fantasy for lots of people. For me also, it was the first time I seriously wanted a PlayStation. I saw the staggering images on the page, how the whole thing looked like this movie, and yet I kinda knew that the game wasn't getting ported to the Mega Drive anytime soon. And so Christmas 1997 I had a PlayStation bestowed upon me alongside 3 games: International Superstar Soccer Pro, because football, Tomb Raider 2 because Lara seemed a safe bet, and FF7. This was the introduction to the new generation, and it took my life over like no other game had or ever has since. I wasn't alone either, so many others seemed to share this experience too, and just gab about all the things that happened. The impact FF7 made back then was quite simply gigantic. No other JRPG before or since has managed to reach its level. The game sold over 10 million copies worldwide. Before this moment, RPGs were a little bit more niche, but FF7 thrust them into the spotlight. It also pretty much came out at exactly the right time, a couple of years into the 32-bit generation. Early adopters wanted something that would truly show off their new toy at the height of its power, and those who were finally ready to put the MD and that away, people like me, wanted something amazing that would sell the new system to them. So basically everyone wanted Final Fantasy VII, whether they knew it or not. A generation's definitive games don't usually come out until a bit of time has passed after all. If FF7 had come out in 1995, we might not have thought much about it. 2 years is kind of the sweet spot for platform-defining games. Think about Sonic 1, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, A Link to the Past, Bioshock, and FF7 fits in there too. It's redefined the genre as a big part of the mainstream, and pretty much secured the PlayStation status as number 1. RPGs were suddenly a big thing, and virtually all of them were on PlayStation. Back then, love for the game was pretty much universal. This sprawling 3-disc behemoth was the new top dog, taking the throne as the greatest game ever made. Nowadays you can get a bit more of a divide. Those who love the games love them as much as ever, still ready to prostrate themselves in front of the game at any given moment. The people who hate the game are just as loud. It's overrated, overhyped, the characters are awful, the plot doesn't make any sense, and bloody hell, will you just shut up about FF7 already? And so the war has raged on. 17 years after its release though, it's still one of the most talked about games around. Hell, the generation that grew up with FF7 are all starting to hit their 30s, and we're seeing more decent copy about the game than ever before, whether it's positive or negative. As for me, yeah, hopefully this is a contribution. FF7 has been a video I've wanted to make since I started, to finally nail down my favourite game of all time. I would play it every couple of years or so, and when that time came, the video would start. But I can't make just one now, can I? This is a huge game of 80 hours or more, over 3 discs, and I want to cover just about every bit of it. There is so frickin' much. So naturally, the review is split into parts. 7 parts. I doubt I can pare it down any more than that, to be honest. We'll be looking at all the big scenes, detailing all the characters, going through the mechanics, the music, the style, who knows, maybe there'll be some extended universe bits to boot. Because FF7 is quite a special RPG, not just for how famous it is, but for how it's virtually like no other. Few big games are as openly personal as this one, while displaying such ambition and scope along with it. If you made this game today, how freaking much would it cost? Billions? Some things about FF7, its technical aspects and particularly some of its character depictions, are of their time, but in other areas it almost transcends time. There's concepts and bits of storytelling we struggle and navel-gaze with in gaming today that FF7 carries out effortlessly. And yeah, there are some flaws, and pretty questionable ones to boot. The EU and all of the spin-offs don't seem to have helped things much, almost simplifying the characters in a way. So you might be surprised as to how the characters actually pan out in the original game. This series is it's going to try and hit everything. It's kind of a big task, but yeah, as a great prophet of the age once said, there ain't no getting off of this train we're on. Let us begin. So we're back to the Flower Girl, the city, and the title. And next thing you know, there's a train. Within seconds, characters are jumping off, attacking guards, and a blonde spiky fellow is under your control, going straight into battle, on a mission to blow up a reactor, and we don't even know why. This is immediately something that sets FF7 out from the rest. Most RPGs take time to delicately introduce characters, set the scene, you know. It can be hours before anything major actually happens, and people expect that. FF7 does not do this. It starts in media res, with everything already a mess and you doing things without even knowing why. The first scene sets a breakneck pace that will pretty much last for the next few hours. Anyway, you're controlling Cloud Strife. He used to be in an elite force called Soldier, and he is actually quite cocky and mercenary-like, believe it or not. The second playable character also flies in pretty sharpish. Barret Wallace, leader of a group of eco-terrorists called Avalanche, who Cloud is now part of. The other characters are Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie, the rest of the team. Low on skill, but high on enthusiasm, and ready to blow stuff up. The first Reactor one is a pretty great introduction, all told. It throws you in at the deep end with a big slice of industrial terror and gets you quickly up to speed with the mechanics. Even if you can't access Materia yet, you can learn about elemental weaknesses and how these robots in particular get absolutely hurt by lightning. Also, the first boss teaches you that it's not always best to just attack willy-nilly. Sometimes you need to wait. Or at least it tries to do this, but the translation is kind of botched. And some seeds are set for later on. Cloud and Barret have a pretty big personality clash going on, and Cloud has the first of many little flashbacks. There is a bit more to his character than just show off. Still, we'll be talking about characters a lot more in part 2. Thanks to Cloud, Avalanche actually succeed in their mission, blowing the reactor sky high. So this isn't just a ragtag group of eco-warriors after all, they're deadly serious. It's pretty bold when you think about it. The first thing our group of heroes do is blow up a government-owned reactor, causing untold amounts of damage, and presumably killing a lot of people to boot. The news reports afterwards certainly suggest that this was not a bloodless crime. This kind of sets the tone going forward. Although there are certainly moments of comedic relief, FF7 is quite a dark game. Why did we do it? For the greater good? That's certainly what Barret says, but you would be forgiven for thinking that might run hollow. To be fair, there doesn't appear to be a better way at this point. Between missions, we get a clearer picture of what's going on. The city is Midgar, a circular metropolis split into 9 separate sectors that used to have names, but don't anymore. The city, and indeed the world, is controlled by Shinra Inc., a megacorporation that specialises in the refining of Mako, the planet's energy. The reactors take Mako and use it to power the city. Mako, for all intents and purposes, is a fossil fuel, and the taking of Mako is polluting the world, turning it into a barren wasteland. There's also a rather obvious class separation. The great and the good of Midgar, Shinra employees basically, live on an upper plate, and everyone else is under that, in the underdeveloped slums. So yeah, I wouldn't plan on catching any rays for the moment. It's all rather dystopian. When Cloud bumps into the Flower Girl from the introduction, it seems to be just a little callback, but it poses a neat little question. Where on earth are flowers growing around here? Who can say? For all we know, they're just plastic and or dead. Cloud explores for a bit, gets chased by some guards, and pulls a bit of a stunt to get back on the train with the rest of Avalanche, where we learn most of the previous minute's exposition thanks to Barret's pontification and Jessie's eagerness to show us the train map. Avalanche are camped out in Sector 7 at a bar that just happens to be owned by Tifa Lockhart, Cloud's childhood friend. Marlene is also here, Barret's daughter, and basically the sole reason for his existence. Again, we've joined the story in progress, but we can gather that Tifa introduced Cloud into the fold. Why is he here and not in Soldier though? And as usual, his brashness and realism clash with Barret's relentless idealistic nature. No surprises there. As for the rest of Avalanche, they're usually better staying the hell out of it. We do get an actual nice flashback to Cloud and Tifa's hometown of Nibelheim, where Cloud declares his intention to join Soldier, and Tifa makes him promise that he'll save her, if need be, one day. Tis all very nice, with the slow pan up, and even a shooting star. It's a perfect memory. Almost too perfect, in fact. Soon enough though, it's time to go back to work and blow up another reactor, with the added bonus that Tifa's going along this time. Yes, she's the third playable character. The rest of Sector 7 acts as a ground to introduce all the other RPG elements, do a bit of shopping, loot people's houses, find out what everything is. Actually, I think it's quite a cute touch that in the beginner's hall, the person who's giving you a tutorial, thankfully only if you want it, is Cloud himself. It's a little nod to consistency and his status. As a fighter, he's clearly far more capable than anyone in his group, and he doesn't need to be taught anything. And as a couple finally agree on something, and commit suicide to celebrate, just to hammer home how utterly terrible and hopeless everything is, we get on the train. And get off it pretty sharpish, because our IDs get all buggered up, and we have to jump off. Avalanche's budget doesn't stretch to a convincing set of fake IDs, sadly. Barret's usual hot-headed nature doesn't help much either. But in the end, the mission is still on. The second reactor is much the same as the first. It might be disappointing at first to see that it's all the same aside from a bluish tint, but it makes sense. This is, after all, a company concerned with mass production and the consumption of Mako. There's no personality here. One can imagine the sectors in the upper plates of Midgar being utterly identikit to boot. Only the slums have a bit more personality. The bomb gets planted, Cloud has another, more detailed flashback, and then, after cracking the easiest security system in the world, we get jumped on and meet our first proper antagonist. President Shinra's even got his own theme and everything. As the name suggests, he's the head honcho at Shinra, and is a classic fat, cigar-chomping boss concerned with nothing but money and power. Geez, he even leaves via helicopter, because he has an important dinner to attend. He leaves you the first proper boss of the game, Airbuster, as well as the awesome boss theme. Gotta have something for these moments, and it makes it a bit special even if Airbuster is the single easiest fight in the game so far, including those grunts from the beginning. Like he's sandwiched in and everything. Despite how easy it is, Cloud manages to get caught in his explosion. Tifa gets upset, Barret is philosophical, and Cloud tries to be strong. But alas, he loses his grip and falls a couple of 100 feet to his death. The end. No, seriously. As he lays somewhere dying, we get to see the voices he's got in his head, trying to get him back. Just trying. And okay, obviously Cloud's not dead. One thing you'll learn about this game is that gravity doesn't matter much. It only hurts if you roll it up into a ball. A church roof and the world's strongest flower bed managed to break Cloud's fall. Wait a minute. Flowers? Yes, by one hell of a coincidence, we happen to fall right next to that flower girl we've seen a couple of times previously. Cloud brushes himself off and has a brief chat. Her name's Aeris, and she is, well, normal, pretty much. No connection with any terrorism thing, no childhood friendship, no crazy flashbacks, just a normal girl who sells flowers, likes Sonata, and has a rather dirty sense of humour. Well, at least until some guy in a suit and some Shinra goons turn up to capture her, calling her an ancient. So yeah, we are still behind the 8 ball. Reno, the aforementioned suit guy, is part of the Turks, Shinra's spies basically, and for now Aeris is going to be doing a bit of damseling, needing Cloud's aid as she tries to escape. Seems pretty typical, but things will change dramatically later on. She is kind of useless in combat for the moment, so the best thing for Cloud to do is use some barrels to Donkey Kong the hell out of these goons. We prevail in the end with Cloud switching roles. He was a mercenary terrorist, and now he's a girl's bodyguard. Gaia has a habit of kicking you further down the ladder, you know. Hanging out with Aeris does introduce a few more things. A chance to do a bit more shopping, probably the funniest mistranslation in the whole game, and a beautiful house, seemingly the only place where anything grows in the slums. The whole scene might make absolutely no sense at all, but it's beautiful anyway, so just roll with it. Makes a change from all the dystopianness and cyberpunkness anyway. Even the house itself is quite nice, so much different from the pits we've been hanging out in. But we've done our job, and we've taken Aeris home. Her mother seems kind of protective though, and asks us to leave quietly in the middle of the night. Something about not wanting her to get hurt again. In any case, we do that, thus ending Aeris' involvement in the story. Well, until she suddenly pops up at the exit to Sector 6. Cloud's typically man about the whole thing, not wanting to take a girl along, saying she shouldn't be accompanying her and blah blah blah. Aeris has none of it, she wants to come along, and that's that. A bit of rushing around later, including some rather cool new monsters like the Hell House, and we take a break at a nice little abandoned playground, where we catch Tifa taking a chocobo ride. Finally, we're back on the trail, and so we come to the best looking part of the whole Midgar section and one of the more memorable parts of the game, the Wall Market. First off, just look at it. An absolute classic pre-rendered creation, so much atmosphere. The best bits of FF7 are like walking around in a freaking painting, and this is one of them. The whole thing here might be a bit of a fetch quest, but it's still a bit of a laugh, as well as being quite bold to boot. The long and short of it is that Tifa, for whatever reason, has gone to see a guy called Don Corneo, boss of the Wall Market. The Don only accepts women into his mansion, and Cloud doesn't feel like busting on in and killing people. For the moment, anyway. Seems like we're stuck. Until Aeris comes up with a fiendish, cunning plan. She thinks that Cloud should drag up in order to get into the mansion. Yeah. For someone like Cloud, the plan is almost contemptible. But it is also the only option, and so he reluctantly agrees. What follows is a collection of rather crazy scenes as we go fetch items. An alcoholic dressmaker gets motivated by the job at hand, even if he's surprised that a guy like him would ever want to dress up. Still, a dress itself isn't quite going to cut it. We need something more. This is where some of FF7's more stereotypical humour comes out. We do other odd things like get medicine for someone who's got the squits, and find out what's in a vending machine for some shopkeeper. But the fun really starts at the Honeybee Inn, a place that I could honestly do a whole frickin' video on. The Honeybee Inn is hilarious, particularly for how it treats Cloud, as precisely the sort of sad sack that would go into this sort of place. The whole sir, thing never gets old, nor does the conversation you get when you try and engage the Honeybee girls in any kind of talking. Again, it does play on some more Japanese fears, particularly the line about hoping that Cloud doesn't follow anyone home. It is quite funny to see our protagonist get treated this way. Poor sod. Don't they know that he's just a nice guy? Wouldn't Milady deserve better than a place like this? Ugh. Anyway, there's other fun stuff, like spying on what appears to be a President Shinra cosplaying as a knight, and an elderly couple trying to get in the mood while some, Finn is watching. But the main thing to do is pick either the fuck room or the group room so you can get another item. The fuck room is actually pretty damn creepy, with Cloud getting his worst flashback yet. They are fully dressed and ready to enter the inn, much to Tifa's surprise. If we've done everything right, not only do we get in, but Don ends up choosing Cloud as his company for the night. I think he might be related to General Melchett. Obviously the passion doesn't last all that long, and our main purpose here, as it turns out, was to get information from the Don about Shinra's activities. And this is where the fun stops. Don Corneo says that Shinra are planning to release the catch on the plate above Sector 7. No, seriously, this is the first page on how to deal with a terrorist organisation, destroy the entire part of the city that they're in. Hundreds of thousands of people will die if they can't be stopped. But the Don sends us into the sewers anyway because, well, he's a bit of an arsehole like that. We get another boss battle, and a fight through the sewers and Sector 7's train graveyard. This is probably the first place in the game where it's recommended to do at least a little bit of grinding, although you never have to do all that much. We reach our destination, and the pillar is still up, but there's tons of fighting on the pillar itself. Wedge falls from the top of the pillar to his death as Aeris rushes off to grab Marlene at 7th Heaven. Biggs and Jessie are mortally wounded too, with Barret still fighting at the top. We get to fight Reno for the first time, but ultimately our efforts are in vain. The bomb cannot be disarmed. More than that, another Turk, Sen, appears with Aeris in tow, having captured her. There is nothing left to do except grab a cable and ride it the hell out of Sector 7, just as the bomb goes off and the pillar comes crashing down, killing everyone. Avalanche didn't save the day and hundreds of thousands died. The whole of Sector 7 has been wiped from the Earth. As confused as Avalanche's motivations might have been, this is a bit much, really. And now there is no more Avalanche. It's quite a powerful moment in the game, really, the first of many. To this point we've been blowing up reactors largely without meeting any consequences for failure. Here we find one, and it's more severe than anyone could have imagined. Shinra has seemingly won, Barret is utterly inconsolable, everything he worked for is lost. The sudden death of Biggs, Wedge and Jessie is a bit of a hammer too. They were only small characters, but they were still kind of well drawn. It even seemed like the game was going to put Cloud and Jessie together at one point. But then, they're all dead. Worse still, Barret thinks he's lost Marlene too. But Aeris said something when she was on the chopper. She's alright? She's alright. This at least gives Barret a bit of hope, and with that, we go back to Aeris' house. There we find out a bit more about Aeris through Elmira, who, it turns out, is not Aeris' real mother. She found Aeris at the dying body of her true mother, Ifalna, as she was waiting for her husband to come back from the war. There is something about this scene. The tint, it coming after a shocking moment, the brief cameo for Biggs and Jessie in the beginning. It is quite affecting, to be honest. Actually, it's probably just that music, but the sense of loss, the things that aren't said, little gestures with animation that would probably look static if they were more detailed, but actually convey something here. It's a tragic scene. In any case, Elmira takes Aeris in. Certain things happen, like Aeris telling Elmira that her husband's returned to the planet days before she receives confirmation of his death, and then Shinra come along, wishing for Aeris to be returned to them, for she's a very special piece of property. And so that's the story, really. Aeris isn't just a normal girl, she's an ancient, the last surviving ancient, in fact. In a lot of the spin-offs for FF7, this is usually where character development for Aeris ends, but thankfully not here. It's also a developing moment for Barret too, for Aeris did indeed rescue Marlene. He has a reason to fight again, but he also has someone he can be thankful for. He is noticeably quite a bit humbler for the time being. And so, we go off to fight. Tifa randomly suggests another trip to Wall Market, where we happen upon a wire that appeared to get exposed after Sector 7 went down. But it's more than just a wire. What is it, Barret? A golden, shiny wire of hope. That's right, and it's our only way to the upper slums. One of the more annoying parts of the game follows, trying to time that bloody jump, although oddly I got it in 2 tries, so no biggie. It is quite a cool moment, especially when you see the wreckage of Sector 7. Makes you think about revenge. And finally, we're there, Shinra HQ itself. It should be noted that everything so far comes in about 4.5 hours of play, perhaps? Seriously, so much happens in all that time, I haven't stopped having to explain things. And then you hit a massive building, far out of proportion with anything else in Midgar. Shinra HQ could easily have been the rest of the game. For all intents and purposes, it's a final dungeon. Shinra are our main antagonists, and this is their HQ. The big question then is, well, how do we get in? Well, there's 2 ways. We could pull a Metal Gear Solid and take the stairs up to the higher floors. Every single one of them. It is quite boring, and not worth it, you'll be shocked to know, although there is some funny dialogue on the way. Still, the sensible approach is to just bust the hell on in. After all, we are the big superhero force, aren't we? That's a bit more in character. Q's scaring the locals and whacking people all about, running battles in elevators, and at last, floor 60. Now the final battle can begin. Or not. Shinra HQ is, as it goes, a bit of a puzzle dungeon. Just about every floor has its own gimmick, and you need to find a keycard to get on the upper floors. The puzzles themselves are pretty straightforward for now, getting past guards, figuring out a password, opening up doors, and you do get a fair few goodies to boot, although it is probably not my favourite bit of Midgar, at least not until the end. The music and setting does give off a nice corporate vibe though, that again is not something we're used to seeing at this point. We also get a chance to listen in on a meeting, where President Shinra details his glorious plan to use Aeris in order to locate the Promised Land, where all of planets Mako congregates basically, and where Neo Midgar will be built, Shinra's crowning glory, and something that will probably drain Gaia's energy for good. God, isn't he evil? I can't wait to get my hands on him, can you? We are also introduced to Hojo, head of Shinra's science division and currently keeper of Aeris. Let's follow him. And so we end up on his floors, where we find... oh my god, what the hell is that? Whatever it is, it seems to set off something awful in Cloud. Some headless thing called Genova. Ugh. Anyway, Hojo's gonna do his thing and crossbreed Aeris with some dog. Barret solves this problem in the only way he knows how. Thankfully, the doors open and said dog, or rather wolf, decides to attack Hojo. He's so good that he'll even help us in the upcoming battle. So yeah, this is Red 13, our 5th playable character, and the first one who is pretty much a supporting character and not clearly involved in the main plot. Still, he is in our depth, so he will happily sign up. And he talks too, and he's smart. After dealing with one of Hojo's many eldritch abominations, we go to escape and, of course, get captured. How utterly rude. The Prez gives another evil speech about controlling the planet and what have you, and we end up in the Slammer. Once again, things look pretty bleak. Aeris is still captured, and the rest of us will probably end up getting executed on television or something. May as well go to sleep. But wait, the door's open. We can leave. Maybe the prison guards decided to rebel. That must be it. Let's go and thank him. Wait, he's dead. In fact, aside from our party, everyone is dead. Blood lines the floor. The walls have been cut apart. That creepy headless thing in Hojo's lab named Genova? Missing. This whole part has a real what the hell is going on kind of vibe. Just completely out of control. And so we head back to floor 69, the President's office, where we find President Shinra, slumped over his desk with a massive sword sticking out of his belly. The guy who was all set to be our main antagonist? He's dead, and no one has any real idea who did it. Except one person, that being Cloud himself. Up to this point, we've only heard the name Sephiroth in passing. The press called him a brilliant soldier, he appears often in Cloud's flashbacks. He seemed to be some sort of great warrior who, for whatever reason, isn't around anymore. But now, Cloud knows he's here, the sword is his, and unlike anyone else, he is not about to celebrate Shinra's passing. He knows that whatever reason Sephiroth has for making his return, it sure as hell isn't good. In his words, this is the real crisis for the planet. Still, the Prez's son comes along to take his place, Rufus. And unsurprisingly, he turns out to be an even bigger bastard than his father, shouting about ruling the world through fear and what have you. Cloud fights him while the others escape, getting their own fight in the process. In one of the more kick-ass moments of CGI in the game, the rest of the crew get in a truck while Cloud rides a bike down the stairs. It's time to get the hell out of here, because this whole thing is much bigger than Midgar. We'll talk more about the bike minigame when we get to cover minigames in more detail, but it is a pretty cool change-up. Finally though, we're out of trouble. But what now? As mentioned, this is bigger than Midgar, or Shinra. There's a whole new threat to the planet, and his name is Sephiroth. Cloud has to find him. He wants some answers, and if necessary, he wants to stop him. And the rest of the group are more than happy to ride along with him. We have the leader of the biggest group of terrorists in the world, a childhood friend who used to run a bar in the slums, a girl who so happens to be the last surviving ancient, a canine research specimen who also talks, and a former member of Soldier who gets crazy flashbacks and hears voices in his head. Looks like we're all set then. This is the moment where the game opens up. Midgar was so huge in scope, it seemed like it could be the whole game itself. Indeed, it is basically a microcosm of the whole game that functions as an introduction. It's quite a breathtaking moment when you realise that was all just one city, and there's a whole world of things to actually explore. Meaning, of course, that there's still a whole lot of adventuring to go. This first part pretty much just had to go through Midgar in full, as it's so important. So much happens here, and nothing would make sense if I didn't go through the lot. Keep in mind that this all happened in about 6 hours, a crazy amount of plot for a JRPG, and such a breakneck speed. And yeah, there is still some more exposition to come very shortly. For now though, the group heads off to a nearby village called Kalm. And yeah, the names of places in FF7 aren't really all that subtle. I may as well just come out with it straight away. Midgar is fantastic, and one of the best realised starts to any game ever. There's plenty of good stuff to come, but Midgar remains one of the game's more memorable parts. For some players of the game, nothing else even comes close to Midgar. It's easy to see why people would think that, as Midgar is virtually a game and story all on its own. It has a 3-act structure, a rise, fall, and then a rise with a twist. It even corresponds to the traditional plot structure of a movie. For a fun experiment, why don't you try looking up Blake Snyder's 15-point beat sheet system for writing a Hollywood movie and seeing how Midgar fits into that? I'm showing you what I came up with right now. It fits into that system a lot better than most games do. As an introduction, Midgar takes some beating, although it is sort of different from what comes next. The breakneck pace necessitates the running of a very tight ship. Everything about Midgar is completely and totally linear, with almost no deviation from the main path. This is quite a marked difference from what comes with the world map. Although the game's never much of a free roamer, the map does allow you to take the story at your own pace a bit more, and everything does become quite a bit slower. This is necessary, of course. There's absolutely no way the game could have sustained the pace set here, although I could see why people would be annoyed at the sudden change in tempo. It doesn't help that Midgar is followed by one of the slowest sections of the whole game, I guess, but we'll be getting to that later. Perhaps a comparison could be made between Midgar and the tanker part of Metal Gear Solid 2. Both are extremely tight sequences with not an ounce of fat on them taking place at breakneck speeds, and neither totally prepares you for the rest of the game, which is a bit more slower and a bit more meandering, but also a lot more open to your input. I'd also argue that Midgar is one of the many reasons why it would be virtually impossible to do a full, modern remake of FF7, because it is very much of its time. Midgar wouldn't have existed without PS1 era technology, no massive abundance of long cutscenes, realistic faces, full voice acting, multi-million-dollar budgets. The lack of technology allowed for much quicker stories. Nowadays I almost feel like it would be necessary to give everything the AAA treatment, and think of just how condensed Midgar is. You'd need to expand it. Midgar is a whole RPG story condensed into 5 hours of gameplay. If you tried to remake it, I think the temptation would be almost too high to expand it crazily, to the point where it would virtually have to be a full game on its own. And to think that this is just the start of Disc 1, we still have all of that, and 2 more discs to boot. There's a long way to go yet. It's a bold move to start the game with something as inch-perfect as Midgar, and it's a testament to FF7's ultimate quality that the game actually does manage to pull off such an insane act of front-loading in such an important title. With that done, we can now start looking at characters, and perhaps doing them the justice that this game done to them, rather than whatever's in the movies and all that. We'll start by looking at our 4 mains. We've literally only just been introduced to Red 13, so we'll save him for another time. For now we'll start with what we know so far about our main hero, good old Cloud Strife. Now what do people usually say about Cloud? They normally say that he's kind of a sullen, emo sort of character, don't they? That he's rather humourless, pretty plain, and that frankly he doesn't have much of a character at all. but the first part of FF7 kind of goes against that. In the beginning, Cloud is presented as the undoubted hero, the most capable guy in the room. This differs so much from most RPG stories. You're so used to seeing the hero have to learn everything basically from scratch, in the classic Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins way. All I know is that they're the chosen one, and they're going to have to struggle to live up to that billing. Cloud, in the beginning of FF7, starts out as utterly capable. There's a sense that Avalanche wouldn't be doing half the things they'd be doing if it wasn't for Cloud's presence, and Cloud sure as hell knows it. He flat out says that if any of his ex-cohorts from Soldier had turned up on the first Reactor run, Avalanche would have been torn apart. This belief naturally brings him into conflict with Barret, who Cloud almost treats with disdain in the beginning. Cloud appears regretful at times that he's not in Soldier anymore, and he considers Barret to be a big fish in a small pond, aware that he kind of is too. He's certainly not afraid to stand up to Barret, and throughout Midgar there's a pretty constant conflict as both try to assert their positions in order to be the leader. It cools down a little as Midgar reaches its climax, but there's a definite sense that they wouldn't ordinarily be friendly with each other. Cloud's brash ways seem to almost come naturally to him, whereas Barret ends up trying to force his position more and more. Still, if Barret is just hot air, his relationship with the other main characters is a little more protective. Needlessly so almost, particularly in the case of Aeris. Still, it's Cloud always trying to take the lead, as he usually does. He's just a bit smarter about it. Tifa is more of an equal, it seems, even though we still don't know an awful lot about their relationship, aside from them being childhood friends. There's almost something unspoken there that's going to become clearer as we continue. One other thing that's usually claimed against Cloud is that he's a rather passive hero. He doesn't direct the plot, other people do. And again, this isn't really the impression we get from the actual game. Cloud drives the plot forward more than anyone. He's always asking the most relevant questions, directing the group to where they should go next, and, in the most crucial moment of all, he knows exactly what Sephiroth's return means, and he immediately gets the group on board with that. Of course, the return of Sephiroth also fits into the one flaw he does have, all those sudden flashbacks. They serve a purpose throughout Midgar by revealing flaws we can't yet fully make out. If Cloud was merely just a brash, cocky ex-soldier, it would still be rather dull, but we can see there's something else bubbling under. Of course, that's a story for another part. He's still the best there is, as far as the party goes. When he's chosen to lead at the end of Midgar, it's not really anything passive. He doesn't ask for it, but honestly at that point, with the way the story's turned, there's no other choice except Cloud. The question is, where does the more negative picture of Cloud come from? To be honest, a lot of it is probably Square's fault. Cloud's character has tended to become simplified as the FF7 universe expanded to include things like films, cameos, and indeed other games. Some of it is possibly a bit more necessary if you look at a prologue game like Crisis Core, whereas others are less so. How he appears in something like Advent Children doesn't really fit into the character we know from this game. He is a bit more, well, emo. Could also be that after FF7, Square managed to gain a reputation of writing more passive, sullen leads in their games, starting with Squall from FF8. And although Cloud doesn't quite fit into that, he almost gets lumbered in just by association. This is all just projection perhaps, but I always have the impression that Cloud is a lot stronger than most people believe him to be. And of course he does have a pretty massive character arc. This character's going to completely change by the time we get to the finish. But that's a story for another time. Okay, let's take a break from character analysis and switch to gameplay. We've barely looked at the actual battle system, you know. And while it's not incredibly complex or anything, it's still something we spend a crap of a lot of time doing. So, let's do it. First off, let's not mince words. In general, FF7 is a pretty easy game. There are occasional difficult moments along the way, but there's nothing that's too troubling. The amount of side quests there are usually means that you can get through the game without ever having to spend hours grinding or anything like that. You can develop skills naturally. So FF7's battle system caters for various styles, and it can be pretty repetitive if you want. If you choose to roll with nothing except physical attacks, then you won't usually have much trouble with any fights in the game. You can press attack all day and be done with it. Still, it's more fun to play around with the magic, as the Materia system is great. It differs from previous FF games, particularly FF6, in that it makes magic open to you at pretty much all times, which again makes it quite easy. But it is pretty awesome to screw around with. There's all the elements you could want: fire, ice, lightning, all of that, tons of healing spells, a whole bunch of weird status effect thingy-majigs, all the fancy summons with their big animations and whatnot, hunting the enemy skills, different commands. Materia adds so much to the game no matter how you're playing it, whether you're going for all-out magic or just smashing folks to smithereens. We'll probably need to do another bit on Materia later on, because so far we've barely seen any of the really cool stuff we can do with it. But so far, we've already seen how it can be used to add the ability to steal stuff from enemies, thus gaining cool items. You can also use a cover Materia so that someone else takes damage aside from the person who the enemy targets. And so much more. We haven't even scratched the surface. And of course, there's limits. What happens when one of your party takes a bit too much damage and decides they've had enough of that? Usually this takes the form of one big massive attack, but some things are unique. Tifa's Beat Rush, for example, which takes the form of a slot machine and means that every limit you earn with her is another chain in the combo. Some characters' limits also allow you to break the game a little, particularly Aeris' ones. Aeris is, as you might guess, our white mage character, and her very first limit heals the party. The game kind of tells you that she's useless in combat and recommends that you put her in the back row so she doesn't get hurt so much. Ignore this, stick her in the front. Hell, put that cover material on her too, and then give her a hyper so she goes into Fury mode and her limit bar goes up faster. And presto, as long as Aeris is in your party and you've got this limit, you're virtually immortal. Enemies can't damage you enough to kill the party before Aeris cures the hell out of everyone with her limit. Nice, huh? Make no mistake, Aeris kicks ass, and we're going to be using her a lot. That's just one example of how you can break this game. It's not a super breakable game, and it's not even all that necessary to break it, but the system gives you a lot of freedom to just have fun with it and play with whatever style you want, which is quite cool. There's still lots of stuff we haven't seen yet, and we're going to be looking at it a bit more in future analysis videos. For now, we have to look at another one of FF7's core characters. He's an insurgent, and he's not a bit nervous. He's Barret Wallace, and at the start of the game he's kind of the de facto leader. He runs Avalanche, he's got the biggest commitment to taking down the Shinra, he wants to save the planet, whereas Cloud is kind of just in it for the greenbacks. And so he tends to get kind of pissy whenever Cloud reminds him that he's not as big as he thinks he is, meaning that he gets hot-headed. Quite a lot, actually. So Barret can be kind of controversial. There's several ways of looking at him. There's the almost apologetic way of looking at it, saying that the game's of its time and this is how Japanese folks see Westerners and all that stuff. Or you can just flat out say that Barret is a big fat stereotype of a big angry black man. I tend to fly somewhere in the middle, but honestly, I'm not a huge Barret fan. Oftentimes he never gives me that much of a reason to care, and it's only so often that he steps beyond that stereotypical eco-warrior Mr. T mode. Of all the characters in the game, he's certainly amongst the most inconsistent when it comes to writing. Also, in all honesty, even when we do get to his actual part of the story, it's really not all that interesting. So of all the playable characters there are, Barret is probably third or second from bottom, but we'll get into that more later. Still, I can try and expand on the character's emotions and arc more, even if I don't always agree with a lot of it. I can at least see why he's particularly angry in Midgar. A lot of it certainly does come from his general anger about the state of the world, which we'll get to in a little while, but there's also the personal side as well. The most positive thing you can say about him is his utter devotion to Marlene, and how he would do absolutely anything for her. Parental figures, or the lack of parental figures, is another one of those themes that runs through FF7, and Barret is kind of unique in that you have a world where most of the main characters have lost their biological parents and are reliant on mother or father figures. Barret is actually a father figure to someone else, and you couldn't possibly deny him that. Really, more than the planet, his whole reason for what he does is that he wants Marlene to grow up in a better world than the one that he grew up in. I also tend to see a lot of his more outward displays of anger or bullying as pure fronting, trying to assert his place as leader in the face of opposition from Cloud. I'm thinking mainly about parts where he, say, randomly goes off on a Shinra employee on the train. As the one man in the group who has a very specific role, he's constantly trying to assert it, making sure that's secure. There are very good sides to Barret as a character. His devotion to Marlene, the trust that he ends up placing in other people, and his absolute code. He's loyal to the core and will stick by anyone who does good by him till the ends of the earth. It's just that a lot of that goodwill struggles to shine when the default animation for his anger is him beating his freaking chest. Barret ultimately settles into a rather passive role, as he never quite changes enough or has the progression you'd want in a character you would truly care about, and the more uncomfortable sides of his character do remain uncomfortable. So he usually ends up on the sidelines when I play through the game, unfortunately. He's more prized for what he offers in combat, long range, heavy physical attacks and the like, than for what he actually brings to the story. Talking about Barret brings us to one of the game's core themes, the environment. Particularly in Midgar, FF7 is all about the preservation of the planet, its Avalanche's reason for existence, and its Shinra's too. One wants to save the planet's resources, the other wants to use them for personal gain and empire building. Mako is the planet's fossil fuel. Indeed, it's described as the planet's very lifeblood, and we use it all of the time. Materia is formed from Mako, the lifeblood of the planet formed into crystals that then refine themselves into something a person can use. Shinra takes this step to a whole new level, industrialising a process that is supposed to be natural. And we see this when we look at the world. Midgar is a grey, hopeless city that runs entirely on Mako that's had its natural process truncated for the purposes of using energy. We're skipping ahead a little here, but the world map itself and the cities of FF7 present a giant metaphor. Midgar itself is surrounded by desolate wasteland because there's simply no more energy left there. Kalm, the first town we come across, is comparatively bright and cheerful, but it's perilously close to Midgar, and one can see that soon enough it'll be swept up by Midgar and become a barren wasteland itself. As for any town in the game that's accepted Shinra into their lives and agreed to have a Mako reactor built there, the consequences for that, well, they're kind of severe. The further we get away from Midgar, the cleaner places tend to become, but the effects of what Shinra's doing is still felt far and wide. After all, it's partly the reason why there's so many monsters milling around to boot. I can think of basically no other game that takes such a stance on the environment in the way that FF7 does. It's a massive, bold pro-eco message. It's one of the things I love about the game, in fact. The message might perhaps become somewhat heavy-handed at times, but it's still kind of important, and I wish that more games would take directions like this one. It wasn't just a case of including a pro-environmental message because it would sell the game, it's clearly something that meant a lot to the people who created the game, and we don't see enough of that in mainstream titles today. Taking on such an approach means that you have to convey a lot of emotion, and a lot of that emotion is angry. You need something to focus that anger on, and in Midgar, you find it in the Shinra Company. Throughout Midgar, they're positioned as the game's main antagonists. It's only at the very end, when things take a turn and Sephiroth takes centre stage, that they find themselves busted down the ranks somewhat. It's quite a powerful moment actually, because in truth Shinra are ahead of you at almost every turn throughout Midgar. You didn't realise that they were perfectly capable of destroying an entire sector just to get back at you, indeed purely for the sake of public opinion. The hundreds of thousands of lives lost was worth it purely to have something negative that could be pinned on Avalanche. In the end, there wasn't even all that much hope of rescuing Aeris. One gets the feeling that you were allowed to fool around in Shinra's HQ as much as you want until you got that little bit too close, at which point you were simply swept up. It's only by chance that you're not left to rot in the cells or publicly executed or whatever. But then, in one fell swoop, they're dead. The guy you've been conditioned to accept as the supervillain has a sword sticking out of his belly. It was so much of a struggle for you, but for this unknown entity, it was effortless. It's at this point one realises that for all the bad things Shinra's done to this planet, it's nothing compared to what Sephiroth could do. Still, Shinra settle nicely into their role as supporting antagonists. They're not so front and centre as they're kind of after Sephiroth as well, but they're always around. After all, Sephiroth is kind of a consequence of Shinra's actions. If it wasn't for them and all of their screwing around, none of this would have happened at all. So how effective are they, really? In the end, they function quite well, although I do end up wishing, at least in Midgar, that they were a bit more faceless. Some people do complain a lot more about FF7's handling of environmental issues being a bit too sledgehammer-esque, and I think a lot of that is down to President Shinra being pretty much the most cliché, cigar-chomping, big boss character you could find. He's really not much of a character at all, and if he did end up being the game's main antagonist, it would probably be a hell of a lot weaker as a result. It's a bit of a relief when he's replaced by Rufus, who is a lot more corporate, honest, and generally better as a character. He's not so shallow. Still, Shinra do have the Turks, and they play a rather strange role in the whole story. So much so, in fact, that we'll be looking at the Turks in more detail at another time. For now though, let's go to another character. With so many big characters introduced in the first part of the game, it's almost all we're doing. Although there's actually not a whole lot to say about this one so far. It takes a while for Tifa to come into her own, although she does end up being perhaps the second or third most important character in our group. That doesn't really happen until Disc 2 though, which is a freaking long way away. For now though, well, what do we know? That she's Cloud's childhood friend, pretty much. And that somewhere along the line, she started hanging out with Barret and became a part of Avalanche. We don't even know why she joined up with them yet, aside from the usual stuff about protecting the planet and what have you. There's got to be something more than that, surely. And well, there is. Let's not forget that we see her in one of Cloud's earlier flashbacks with her dead father, shouting how she hates them all, how Sephiroth did this to her dad, picking up the sword to get revenge. It makes no sense whatsoever when you first see it, but when you reach the end of Midgar, well, it still doesn't make much sense. But if you think on it, then you wonder what she knows, and how much she's hiding. Her full name, Tifa Lockhart, is another clue. You know, that Phoenix Wright sort of thing where the name's all punny and says something about the character. She's got a locked heart, and ought to get it seen to real quick. Tifa is one of the more complex characters in the game, with a long arc, and we've barely seen any of it yet, so we'll be getting back to her. Okay, so moving on to another thing. Let's talk about FF7's graphics, one of the things that tend to go against it quite a bit these days. They are most definitely of their time. You get pre-rendered backgrounds for the characters to walk on, and the characters themselves are these tiny low-poly models. It could all seem like a bit of an illusion. If you removed the background, there'd be nothing but a black screen. A lot of games in the PS1 era used pre-rendered backgrounds. Resident Evil is another prominent example, but this game's where they really stick out, if only because of those models. They're chunky, they don't have proper hands, they look a bit silly, you know. Although to be honest, I don't know if it's just nostalgia talking or anything, but I find them kind of cute and endearing. Honestly, they're like 3D versions of the sprites you'd get in 16-bit RPGs and the like. One other thing about the sprites is that they can and do make a lot of gestures. Say what you will, but there's quite a bit of animation, with occasionally the most subtle differences here and there between one character's nod and another. That sort of detail. When writing the script for FF7, Kazushige Nojima and Yoshinori Kitase said they were going for extreme realism. A little bit of that gets lost in the translation, which we'll get to properly in another part, but the gestures do a lot to fill in the blanks and convey the emotions they want to portray, without simply relying on words. The flashback to when Elmira finds Aeris at the train station is pretty much entirely made by those little animations. And, well, when we get to the most famous moment of the whole game, we'll see some beautiful examples. These little blocky characters emote a hell of a lot, and it's always welcome. To be honest, it feels like a bit of a lost art. There's too much reliance on realistic models or voice acting these days. People make characters that are lifelike, but then don't really do anything with them. The models in Final Fantasy VIII might have looked better and they might have been realistically proportioned, but there's definitely a difference between the charm there. And no, I'd never want to replace those blocky models with the ones you see in the battle scenes, as good as they are. They just fit the world that little bit better. And as for those pre-rendered backgrounds, yeah, that's another lost art. There's some truly wonderful detail in a lot of places in Midgar. When you get out of the first reactor, the floors of Shinra HQ, Aeris' home, and especially the wall market. Again, there's a great commitment to some things that aren't even all that necessary, but give life to what could just be a static picture. No game quite used pre-rendered backgrounds like this one did. The best moments of the game are like walking through a painting. I wish more games would just give themselves over to artistic license the way this one does. There are some legitimately excellent graphics in FF7. The aforementioned battle scene models are still great, as are the battle scenes in general, and the game had fantastic CGI cutscenes for the time, with seamless transitions between pre-rendered graphics and full motion video. But weirdly, it's the things that date the game the most that I really cherish about it, if only because you just don't see a lot of stuff like it anymore, and you wish someone would go ahead and bring that back. The 16-bit RPG is quite well represented when it comes to people still making games in that style, but if only some people were willing to bat for the 32-bit style as well. Of course, that may be asking a bit too much when it comes to indies, but you never know. Finally in this video, we have one more character to look at, possibly my favourite character in the whole game, in fact. A little while into Midgar, we get introduced properly to a flower girl from the slums we saw in the first screen of the game, Aeris Gainsborough. For whatever reason, the sheer coincidence of Cloud falling through a church roof just as the Turks were getting ready to capture her, not to mention simple bloody-mindedness, she decides to come along. Someone who appears to be every bit a normal girl. Although of course that wasn't really going to last now, was it? As we know, she's the last surviving ancient. We don't know much about them, but Shinra believes that Aeris can lead them to a place called the Promised Land, and so they want her for themselves. Seems like a good setup for a proper damselin, doesn't it? And to be honest, you get that a lot in Midgar. We do end up going to Shinra HQ to save Aeris, after all. But there are some details that make things a little different, like how she wasn't just captured, but that she actually offered herself to the Shinra instead of Marlene, Barret's daughter. It kind of makes you wonder if she actually has a bit of a plan all along. She's certainly the most relatable of all the characters though, because, well, she's so normal. One of the best moments in her characterisation is right at the beginning. She breaks up laughing when Cloud says he'll do almost anything. She's clearly caring, thoughtful and independent, and the whole scene might be angelic in a way, but that doesn't stop her from having a dirty sense of humour, and this is before she gets the idea to stick Cloud in a dress. The general normalcy of Aeris is something that kind of gets lost a little in the whole EU, where she often becomes this almost ethereal thing. Her being the last of the ancients defines her, and all the cliches that would go with that. There's a bit more to her though, and as far as personality goes, she might be the best realised character in the whole game. The rest of Disc 1 will also, well, Aeris will certainly stop being any kind of typical damsel in distress. In fact, she will become the exact opposite. But that's all to come. So, we've left Midgar. We've gone through it all with a fine-tooth comb. And so the journey continues. We left our party on the outskirts of Capital City, with Cloud as the new leader. Our first destination so happens to be pretty close by. So after a brief pause to take in our surroundings, we head off to Kalm. It's not exactly an important place, but it's such a nice wee contrast from everything we've seen before. And indeed it represents a bit of a slowing of the pace. As opposed to the massive heaps of plot thrown at us left, right and centre in Midgar, we now get to relax a little and take in sights that aren't utterly cyberpunk-tastic. But really, we're here for one reason only. We go to the inn, where Cloud has a little story to tell. So yeah, it's time for the almighty flashback of plot exposition. We go back to 5 years ago, when Cloud was still in Soldier and was often signed with a rather famous war hero, perhaps the greatest soldier the world has ever known. A man with a black cape, long white hair, and an even longer sword. Sephiroth. This mission takes us back to Cloud's hometown of Nibelheim, where there have been reports of monsters around the reactor. Cloud's all chipper about it, which doesn't help much when the truck bumps into a massive dragon, which Sephiroth rips apart like it was a bloody Shinra guard or something. This is a nice quick little use of gameplay to demonstrate just how much stronger Sephiroth is than, well, basically anything. especially Cloud. We head into town with Sephiroth providing a few casual details. He doesn't know much about his parents, aside from his mother being called Jenova, and he doesn't actually have a hometown. Cloud and Sephiroth have a decent enough rapport, but he's clearly boss, strictly business, a name means nothing on the battlefield. Give him a bandana and a soakum, and he could fly around Shadow Moses, no problemo. We can at least screw around in this sedate little town for a bit. There's a kind of important scene where we get to meet Cloud's mum, which we sorta saw a bit of earlier. Things go well, but Cloud says that she died a few days later. Not much else to do but go to Tifa's house, do a bit of comfing, play a piano, and get some sleep. The following morning is all business time. First revelation, Tifa was there 5 years ago. She's going to be our guide for the mission, taking us through Mount Nibel. As it turns out, not very well, as a rickety bridge snaps and one of the guards cops it. Sephiroth gets a chance to wax lyrical about Materia along the way and bitch about fellow Shinra colleagues, but ultimately it's all about that reactor. There's some rather ugly monsters inside, humans that have been exposed to Mako a wee bit too much. Every soldier gets a bit, but these guys have a full-blown dose. But what's this? The thing up top? Jenova? Sephiroth's mother? In the middle of another big explanation, Sephiroth suddenly goes rather nuts. He puts 2 and 2 together, makes 5, and believes that he was also created in this way. These were failures, he was a success. But in the end, just another abomination. So the team stays in Nibelheim. Sephiroth spends all his time in the cellar of an old Shinra mansion, reading countless books and reports, not entertaining visitors. He reads about Jenova, an ancient that was injected into the planet many moons ago, like a lethal dose of poison. He muses on the teachings of Professor Gast, old head of Shinra's science division and one of Sephiroth's mentors. He wishes to be left alone. Until one day, he makes a final connection. That he is an ancient, that humans hid while the ancients died, and that the planet rightfully belongs to him and his mother. As you do. It's quite a chilling moment when Sephiroth's theme finally plays in full as he curses Cloud as a traitor. Still, Cloud got off lightly. Look at what happened to the town. Everything is in flames. Cloud goes into his house, but there's nothing we can do. And of course, there's that moment when Sephiroth disappears into those flames. At the reactor, we see the scene where Tifa cries over her dead father, picks up the sword, and swears revenge. Needless to say, this goes badly. Sephiroth wounds Tifa severely, but she lives, reminding Cloud of the promise. Sephiroth goes into the chamber for a big evil speech and to take off the cover, revealing Jenova, the headless abomination herself. Cloud, however, refuses to let Sephiroth past. And so the fight begins. Both stand ready, and then... nothing. Cloud has no idea what happened next. We're back in Kalm, with everyone on tenterhooks. It's worse than looking down the barrel of Jesse Pinkman's gun. Cloud's mental block is quite serious. He knows he and Sephiroth fought. But what then? How is he still alive, even? We know already how much stronger Sephiroth was, so what happened? There's no way Cloud could have possibly beaten Sephiroth. So many questions still left to be answered. More than just stopping Sephiroth, we need to figure out what exactly happened. And so, our party knows everything now. Well, sort of, I guess. The flashback section is important, but it is kind of tough to follow, which is sort of worrying because almost every detail in it is essential, as we'll find out later on. For now, we have to plough on. We hear that Sephiroth is on his way to a place called Junon. To get there though, we have to cross marshes belonging to the Midgar Zolom. This is a pretty cool part, actually. You face the Zolom, and she's terrifying. The Zolom kicks your ass, in fact, but she tends to just kick people out of the party so that you don't flat out die. The way to get across is to go to a nearby chocobo farm and learn how to catch a chocobo so you can avoid the Zolom. But once you cross the marshes, you see this. Presumably the same Zolom you just got your ass kicked by, impaled on a gigantic spike. There's only one person who could have done this. I love it. It's one of the best images in the whole disc. And you know what? It does a much better job of summarising just how much stronger Sephiroth is than anything in the Kalm flashback. The next big town we see then is Junon, which is kind of like Shinra's second city, a port town with a big focus on military equipment, impressive airships, a massive cannon. Hell, the whole town can become a huge assembly of cannons in seconds. It also has a similar structure to Midgar. Shinra's up top and the actual town is miserable and on the bottom. First thing we have to do is save a girl who nearly drowns from a somewhat mediocre boss, and then play a couple of minigames, one to give her CPR and the other to get her pet dolphin to carry us to the upper plate. Once we're there, a dumb officer thinks we're just walking around in uniform and we're thrust into yet more minigames. Welcoming Rufus to Junon, trying to march in line, doing some crap in a parade. Yeah, it's not a favourite part of the game, although the town itself is great looking, with some beautiful shots. The main purpose is simply to stealth our way onto a boat that's travelling to the next continent. Reports say Sephiroth's already crossed the ocean. Eventually we do that, but it kinda takes longer than it should. Oh, also, before I forget, we so happen to have a new character in our party now. We found this little ninja girl called Yuffie in the forests outside the city, and after buffing her ego up a bit, she joined up. Yuffie's one of 2 missable bonus characters in the game, and she's by far the easier one to miss, at least if you never go into forests. I like her though, so I got her as soon as I could. She's a long-range character who doesn't do bad with magic, and eviscerates fools with a whopping great shuriken. So, we're on the boat. Not much happens aside from Red's hilarious attempts at trying to pass as a human. Oh, and Barret nearly screwing everything up by shooting at Rufus and Heidegger. Mercifully, he's stopped by a disturbance in the lower decks. Turns out everyone down there's bloody dead again. We thought Sephiroth had already crossed the ocean. But no, he's doing it right now, and we're on the frickin' boat with him. Another guard falls, and is replaced by the man himself. And so, once again, Cloud sees Sephiroth in the flesh. But Seph barely even notes his presence. He spouts craziness, then just frickin' flies away, leaving us with Jenova, or at least a part of her. So cue an actual important boss battle, the first against Jenova, representing Birth. It's not actually a difficult battle, but it does have the best music in the game accompanying it. It also wakes the plot up a little after some slow going. Finally, we have actually seen Sephiroth again, but his brief appearance just leaves more questions as to what he's doing. Anywho, we've crossed to the next continent, and we get to chill out. There may not be much to do in Costa del Sol, but it's still one of the more relaxing places in the game. We even get to meet up with old friends. Johnny's here, so's Mookie and all again from the Honeybee Inn. Oh, and Hojo, who recently upped sticks and left Shinra, and is now in the business of getting a tan going. Smug git. He's as personable as ever, but he makes sure to tell you to head way out west. Alas, we can't just spike the guy then and there. Oh well, time to take some frustration out on poor old Red 13. Anyway, we go west, through some very scenic surroundings. A beautiful little cave, a rail system that's almost like a roller coaster, an active reactor, a long bridge. It's all very pretty, although it's packed full of enemies. And no, I didn't kill the bird. What do you think I am, a monster? But of course, you should know what the presence of a reactor means. We've come across another crap town. The thing about the rest of Disc 1 is that it's mostly about individual stories, going through them one at a time. We've had Cloud's, and now we get Barret's. Corel is the biggest dump we've seen so far. Matter of fact, it wouldn't look out of place in Fallout. And apparently, Barret is the reason for this. The townsfolk despise him. And of course, there's a paradox too. The only reason to go to Corel is a ropeway that leads to the next location, the fabled Gold Saucer. Barret explains it all at the station. Corel used to be a small coal mine in town, and he was born here, living with his wife. One day, Shinra came along, extolling the virtues of Mako and asking permission to build a reactor. And Barret was on their side. Turns out, he wasn't always an eco-warrior. Notice how he doesn't have a gun arm either? One of the residents, somebody named Dine, was against it, but eventually the reactor was built, and what happens next is predictably predictable. Shinra burnt the whole village to the ground. Barret's wife, Myrna, perished, as did most everyone else. Barret just about escaped with Marlene. Presumably, then President Shinra was peering down from a helicopter while listening to classical music. So we get a little closer to Barret's truth and why he's oh so angry and what have you. And seeing as he was the biggest advocate for Coral's reactor, that's why the now ruined village hates him. Final Fantasy VII is such a bright and cheerful game, isn't it? Anyway, on that happy note, let's go have some fun! The Gold Saucer is perhaps the most memorable location in the whole game, and not just for the crazy difference between what you've just seen. This is Shinra's Disneyland, a giant tribute to Mako, and it's more spectacular than you could possibly imagine. There's lots of fun to be had here, and most of the groups game for a bit of relaxation. Well, aside from Barret, but Aeris at least tries to perk him up a bit. Yeah, it doesn't work. Anyway, Cloud and Aeris go off to have fun, do some amusements, and... excuse me? This weird plushie with a mog on top interrupts us and tries to tell us our fortune. Hang on, haven't we seen it before? At the Honeybee Inn? And why the hell's the game asking me to give it a name? And so the mog reads our fortune, or tries to, but comes up with nout but crap. Until... what, again? Apparently he never got a fortune like that before. And now, oh, wait, he's coming with us? And whether we like it or not, we have a new addition to our party, Cait Sith, who is, well, kind of weird. We get no choice in the matter. He's forced his way onto the journey, and that's that. Maybe we're getting a bit of a rep. Blowing up reactors and taking down the Shinra will do that to you, I guess. Anyway, there's a wide variety of fun to be had here. Various amusements, all based around minigames and winning GP so that we can buy coolness. There's tons of other places too. A haunted hotel, a chocobo racing arena, a big roller coaster where you shoot things. All damn fun, and all apparently owned by some weird dude named Dio who walks around in a phon and flexes a lot. Still, you know what really looks cool right now? The Battle Square. Nothing like having a good old scrap, is there? So let's go do it. Wait a minute. Suddenly a guard slumped to the floor. The creepy music from Shinra HQ's playing, you know, when Sephiroth killed everyone. And once again, everyone is dead. But there's a difference this time. They've all been shot. Nice things indeed cannot be had. What the hell have you done, Barret? In any case, Dio and his guards catch us milling around and naturally suspect us. We run into a dead end and we get chucked through a hole. Notice how Gold Saucer's budget is such that Dio thinks nothing of chucking the robots down there with us too. And so, we're in the clink. Continuing with the metaphor of splendour at the top and desolation at the bottom, located underneath the Gold Saucer is a desert prison, impossible to get out of, filled with the worst the planet has to offer. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. Not much to do except try to find answers and avoid getting shivved. Eventually we catch up with Barret, and after making out like he's going to shoot us too, he continues his story. Barret says that he didn't kill anyone at the Gold Saucer, and that there's someone else who had a gun grafted on their arm. Cut to the flashback again, with Barret and Dine walking back to Corel and suddenly finding their village burn into the ground. They rush to the rescue, but Shinra troops led by Scarlet ambush them. Eventually, Barret clings onto Dine's hand as he's suspended from a cliff's edge, but another shot straight to both of their hands sends Dine into the abyss. When Barret got his gun arm, he found out that another person had the same surgery, only on a different arm. Who do you reckon that was? Dine is, of course, right here in Corel Prison, where he's the top dog and not to be messed with. Anyway, naturally Barret has to make peace. Dine's not especially pleased to see Barret again, nor is his mind in a good place. After all, he's lost everything too. He lost his town, he lost his wife, Eleanor, and he lost his daughter. Wait, his daughter? Why, yes. If any revelation's important here, it's that Barret is not Marlene's father. Dine is. Worse still, he's now talking about bringing Marlene to see Eleanor. You know, his dead wife. And so, fighting happens, with predictable results. Dine accepts his defeat and at least delivers the effective if melodramatic line about his hands being too stained to carry Marlene, a daughter who would barely recognise him. And so in his final moments, Dine accepts Barret as Marlene's guardian, gives him the pendant from around his neck, and then chucks himself into the canyon to his death, leaving Barret in shreds, with hands that are too stained to carry Marlene either. To get out of jail, we need to win a chocobo race after getting approval to participate from the boss. Seeing as the boss is now dead, that's no longer a problem. And so we go up, we win, and we're exonerated. Plus we get a buggy as a bonus, which allows us to move around a bit faster. And we get a lead on Sephiroth, who's been seen near a place called Gongaga. Now Gongaga is kind of an optional place, but a couple of important things happen there. First, we're ambushed by Reno and Rude for another fight, which brings up the possibility of a spy in the group. Wonder who that could be. I don't know, I don't really suspect anyone. Well, aside from that big plushy toy that forced his way into our group just now. Secondly, we see Scarlet and Sen prowling around for what they call huge materia, something they can use to create a massive weapon. And thirdly, we find out about someone named Zack. Zack, like Cloud, is a soldier, one who's been missing for a few years now. But more importantly than that, he's Aeris' ex-boyfriend, whom she mentioned soon after we first met her because Cloud kinda reminded her of him. We can ask Tifa about Zack too. And weirdly, she gets rather defensive about the whole thing, changing the subject immediately. This is all actually pretty important to the plot, although that becomes more apparent on multiple playthroughs. Strange then how it's in a largely optional town, and you only see any of this if you're rolling with Aeris and Tifa. But it does add some important detail. And who knows, maybe Tifa's the spy. Why would she suddenly get so defensive? Who knows? Anyway, Sephiroth isn't here, and the town itself is another one that's been screwed over by a Mako reactor. Good times. The buggy breaks down in a valley, but thankfully there's another town close by. So yay, more dystopia, more pain, more dead people. But wait a minute, what's this? The town's actually vibrant and in good shape. It's gorgeous in fact. This is Cosmo Canyon, and as you can quickly surmise, it's one of the few places in the world that hasn't accepted Shinra as their lords and saviours. There's no reactor here, and so everything is normal. Red 13 goes running up the stairs, starts calling himself Nanaki, and shouts that he's home. So yeah, the individual character development theme continues. We just had Barret's story, and now it's Red 13's turn. Fitting really, seeing as he said he'd accompany us back to his hometown, and so presumably this is the end of his journey. Anyway, there's plenty of fun to be had here, but things only really progress when we meet up with Bugenhagen, Red's grandfather, and curator of the best simulation of the solar system that the planet has to offer. And we get to have a look at it. This is one of the best Disc 1 moments, actually. The part where the planet loses its energy and then crumbles away, actually still effective. We also learn a bit more about our group around a campfire. Another moment as it kinda reflects the Rearian nature of our journey. Though Barret seems like he's on a second wind, Tifa appears ever more neurotic, and even Aeris seems to have become more introverted, aware more than ever that she is the last of the Cetra. Red 13 is also the last of his race, and talks about how his father ran like a coward when Cosmo Canyon was attacked, and that he can never forgive that. Cue Bugenhagen, obviously. Bugenhagen opens a long-sealed door, and we get to go through a dungeon, quite a hard one in fact, although the boss here is famously insta-killable with an X potion. What, didn't you read the magazines? Anyhow, at the end of the dungeon, we look upon a statue. Oh, no, not a statue. An animal turned into stone. Of course, it's Cito, Red's father, who defended Cosmo Canyon from the G tribe until he could take no more, and poisoned arrows turned him to stone. Red, for whatever reason, was never told. It's old fiction logic though, I guess. Don't tell the son about the heroic act, otherwise he could never truly emulate his father. That sort of thing, dramatic license. And of course, Cito cries stone tears and Red howls in tribute. Also, Bugenhagen, despite believing that the planet is doomed, convinces Red to continue on with us. So with our buggy fixed, we head on. Red's story is, better than Barret's. Not so drawn out, no flashbacks, a satisfying finish. Fleshes out the character a lot more too, which we'll get into in his analysis. A great setting also helps. Still, is Sito crying because he sees what his son has become? Or is it because he wants Red to throw him a frickin' soft or something and get him the hell out of his immobile state? Who knows. Our next destination? Well, it's one we've been waiting to see for a long time. The scene of all that happened 5 years ago. A place that burned to the ground. Where our whole story started, really. We get out of our buggy and walk into Nibelheim. But wait, we saw the flames, did we not? We saw everyone perish. And yet, nothing's happened. Everything is intact. Cloud is, needless to say, shocked. The residents are bright and breezy and shoo us away when we accuse them of lying. But they're not the only ones in town. A horde of people in black shrouds shuffle along, moaning about a reunion and seeing Sephiroth. Finally, on visiting Tifa's house, we uncover the truth, which turns out to be far worse than the burnt embers we were expecting. Nibelheim was rebuilt by Shinra 5 years ago, after the incident. The townspeople we see are actually Shinra scientists, and the people in black shrouds? They're clones from Sephiroth's DNA. Sort of like what we saw in the flashback, all tattooed with numbers. Horrifying experiments are going on here. There's even one room where you can encounter 2 slightly smaller clones, obviously meant to be children. Did I mention already that this is quite possibly the most depressing game ever made? We get a proper lead. One of the clones moans that Sephiroth himself is inside Shinra Mansion. Also inside here is a puzzle, apparently designed by Hojo himself, that could lead us to something in the basement. Use clues, find numbers that will unlock a safe. It's quite tough actually, not least because once you actually do unlock the safe, you're greeted with one of the toughest bosses in the game. FF7 might be easy, but Lost Number is one of the few places where the underleveled player can get utterly stuck. Still, he fell, and we travelled to the basement, where we encounter a disguised, depressed figure sleeping forever in a coffin. A former member of the Turks, in fact, who, as it turns out, knows a bit about Sephiroth and, shock of horrors, his real mother, a person named Lucretia. Naturally, we tell him all we know so far, but this only depresses him further, and he tells us to go away. Fine, whatever. In the library, though, we once again come face to face with Sephiroth. He tells us about the reunion, the place where Jenova will rejoin the planet and create what he calls a calamity from the skies. And we're invited. Alas, he has little time for small talk. He goes away again, and all that's left is to find the trail. But wait, as we leave the basement, the man in the coffin holds us up. Will we meet Hojo? Yes, most likely. Fine. And so he joins us. As you've probably guessed, this is Vincent, and he's the second optional character in the game. We'll see him from time to time. For now, we follow the buzzards and push through Mount Nibel, a straight dungeon that we recognise from the flashback. There's a few game-breaking items here, and an impressive boss, but on the whole not much in the way of plot. So we leave the mountains behind and head on to the next town. It's an odd town because, well, there's something pretty big sticking out of it. It's a frickin' rocket. This is the imaginatively named Rocket Town. The rocket itself is kind of rusty and is tilted somewhat, but still, I guess it's something of a landmark. The rest of the town is, well, boring. Purposefully so. No clones milling about, no reactor-related devastation. This is the closest FF7 gets to the suburbs. We'd have to go all the way back to Kalm to see another town that's so average. Everyone talks about someone called the Captain. He's in the rocket, they say. Although really we're mainly interested in the plane that's kicking about in his backyard. We're kind of away from our buggy for the moment, so we could do with a means of getting around a little bit quicker. Still, the plane belongs to this captain fella, so perhaps we should go up to the rocket and talk to him. So, we do. And who do we find? Well, something beyond all human comprehension. Let's just say, you don't talk to the captain, you experience him. He's the best pilot in the world, he's going to go up into space someday and get out of this hole of a town. A million words a minute and they're all gold. This is, of course, Cid Highwind. And he's kind of excited today because the Shinra are coming to visit. Rufus is going to be here, and he's going to bring back the space program, fulfilling Cid's dream. Cid storms back into his house and shouts at his wife, girlfriend, whoever, kind of a lot. It's sort of full on, really. His target's name is Shira, and yeah, I'll just say that I have a lot to say about this relationship when I analyse Cid in the next video. For now, Shira explains that Cid's pissed off at her because when the rocket was going to launch, Shira couldn't leave the engine compartment. She had to check the oxygen tanks, the reading wasn't right, but there wasn't enough time to complete the check. Cid cancelled the launch to prevent Shira from being burnt to a crisp, Shinra abandoned the space program, and Cid's been stuck here ever since. But still, Rufus is here. Things are looking up, aren't they? Well, no. Rufus doesn't give a toss about the space program. Instead, he wishes to borrow the tiny Bronco. Cid naturally tells him to piss off, so Palmer tries to steal the plane for the cause, resulting in a jokey boss battle, and we end up flying off with it. Cid catches up with his beloved plane, but after a few shots, it ends up crashing into the sea. So, we don't have a plane, but we do have a boat. Of sorts. And also, we have Cid. There's no reason for him to stay in Rocket Town, so he decides to come with us. And with that, our actual party is complete. Assuming you've already got Yuffie and Vincent, Cid's the last character to join up. For now, he's content to just be a badass. We do have an important lead though. Rufus mentioned that Sephiroth was headed somewhere called the Temple of the Ancients. Seems like a pretty important place. For now though, we can screw around with the tiny Bronco for a bit. We go to an isolated little house where the resident tells us that he sold something called a keystone that opens the key to a temple somewhere to Dio, that weird fella who runs the gold saucer. And so we head on over. One little visit to the battle square later, and the keystone is ours. But the ropeway's broken. Bugger. Looks like we're stuck here for the night. Oh well, may as well head off to the haunted house. It's a chance to rest up and review what's happened so far, really. Which isn't much. We're still after Sephiroth, and he's always a few steps ahead. But maybe this lead's a bit more concrete. We shall see. For now, it's time to sleep. But wait, there's a knock on Cloud's door. And, well, it's Aeris. Remember when we first met her, how she said she'd let Cloud go out with her, once? Well, this is that time. Actually, depending on how you interact with the party, several people can knock on the door. If you favour Tifa more, you can get her. If you really screw the pooch with both Aeris and Tifa, you can get Yuffie, or, my god, you can get Barret. Still, Aeris is by far the likeliest option, and the one the game pushes you towards. And so, it's the one we're doing. Cloud and Aeris have lots of fun, we take part in a play, and even though Cloud totally screws it up, it's fun all the same. We then go to the round square and take in the sights. It's a nice, poignant moment actually. Aeris says she's still searching for Cloud, that she wants to know the real him. After that, all of a sudden, we see Cait Sith milling about. And, wait, he's got the freaking keystone. We give chase, but Cait Sith ends up throwing it to Sen. So yeah, Cait Sith's the spy. Quelle surprise. Oh, but don't worry, he'll still come along with us. Hell, he'll force us to, seeing as he works for the Shinra, and he knows where Marlene is. So, you know, put two and two together. In any case, it's time to head off. Our long-awaited destination lies eastwards. We're finally going to the temple. The temple is an important moment in the game. Really, the plot hasn't advanced all that much since Midgar. We've done lots of character building and individual stories, but that man in a black cape has always eluded us. We just know little bits about reunions, Genova, calamities, and black materia, which apparently we'll find here. There's a promise that some of these questions are going to be answered right now. It feels climactic. Aeris is, of course, with us. And the first thing we see is a seriously injured Sen, who's just had an encounter with Sephiroth, and realises that Shinra have been wrong about this Promised Land thing all along. So yeah, he's here too. The Shinra, once again, have been decimated. One nice touch here is Aeris' emotion over Sen's state. Despite everything, they've known each other since they were kids. You almost get a Fox and the Hound type vibe from it. Anyway, we can't think about that right now. It's time to head in. Most of the temple is pure dungeon, and it's one of the best dungeons in the game to boot. The first room is possibly one of the most memorable rooms in any dungeon ever, actually. Lots of loot to be had as well. It's a fine showcase for our skills, particularly Aeris. There's some puzzling to be had too, what with the Time Guardian's room, catching up with the Spirit of the Ancient and the like, seeing just what happened with Sen, and one of the more poignant lines in the game. Someday we'll look back on these hard times and laugh. Finally, we reach the centre of the temple and set ourselves up for the big encounter. But again, Sephiroth is mysterious. He talks about becoming one with the planet, of a wound so great that he will be at the centre of. He talks of the ultimate destructive magic, Materia. It's a grand speech, of course, but it seems to have quite the effect on Cloud. Suddenly, he's not himself at all. He almost seems controlled. But he snaps out of it, and the black materia is right there. But it can't just be grabbed. Turns out the entire temple guards the materia, and whoever takes it out will be crushed by the temple. So, we're stuck. But then Cait Sith turns up. He'll do it, basically. After all, he's only a toy. And hey, maybe there's a bit of remorse there. For now, well, we must get out, although there's a bloody hard boss along the way. Well, I say that, but I have Aeris in my party, and therefore nothing can possibly stop me. Did I mention that great gospel cures an entire party and makes them invincible? Cait Sith gets to deliver a farewell speech and even reads our fortunes. He says that Cloud and Aeris are perfect for each other. And Tifa's, right there. Bless. Anyway, Cait goes off to sacrifice himself. Honestly, I dislike the character, but still, it is kind of a poignant moment. At least the line about there being only one me, even if another Cait Sith comes along. We see the temple collapse, look at the big gaping hole, and see the materia. It's ours, and as long as it's ours, we're safe. Sephiroth cannot cast Meteor. Perhaps Sephiroth can chase us for a change. And then, wake up. He was here the whole time. He knew this, he expected this, and he knew just what to do. Cloud collapses into a wreck. He's lost control. All those flashbacks, those breakdowns and the like, the feeling that something's wrong, it's been leading up to this moment. Cloud's body and soul separates. His young self can only watch in horror as Cloud places the black materia in Sephiroth's hands. Absolutely nothing we can do. Aeris says to be strong, not to worry, that it's not his fault. But everything is broken. Cloud flings himself on Aeris and starts beating her with his fists. It's not exactly the best time for the second Cait Sith to suddenly waltz back in. Fade to white. A forest. Aeris? She says not to worry about what happened. Cloud apologises. It's okay. Aeris has a plan. She's going to stop Sephiroth. To do so, she must go to the City of the Ancients. As for Cloud, well, he should just get some rest. Don't worry about it. Don't come. But again, Sephiroth is there too. The girl must be stopped soon, must be dealt with, in the most extreme possible way. Sephiroth was never worried about Cloud, was he? And why? Well, because he was always in control. We wake in Gongaga. There's little to say. Barret tries to pep Cloud up in his usual way by calling him a jackass and the like, and of course by saying that we have to go to the city. Aeris is alone there, and she's in danger. We can't not go. As much as we don't want to, we have to go north. Whatever happens, happens. There ain't no getting off of this train we're on until we reach the end of the line. Take the Bronco to a place called Bone Village, dig for the lunar harp that takes us through the forest of our dreams until we find it. The forgotten capital, perhaps the single eeriest location in the game. The music, the wastes, the HR giganess of it all. so alien from everything that we've seen. But even here, we can't find Aeris. But she's coming, and he's coming. All we can do is wait. Finally, Cloud feels it. Wake up. It's in his soul. They're here. We go deep into the city, below sea level, under the waves, to the very core where Aeris kneels. We've come to, what? Help her? Protect her? Or no. It's as everybody feared. Cloud reaches Aeris and draws his sword. He tries to control himself, but he cannot stop himself from taking aim, raising it above his head, and then ultimately bringing it down to just above Aeris' head. Suddenly, Cloud snaps out and regains control. He stopped himself? His friend stopped him? Who knows? Aeris looks up and actually smiles, happy to see Cloud, her bodyguard, her friend, maybe even more. The glint of Mako in his eyes, the uneven spikes of his hair, the shape of his face, bathed in a white light as something black falls from the ceiling. These are the last things Aeris sees. The last things she will ever see. Suddenly, Sephiroth stands over Aeris, still kneeling, wide-eyed, with a sword protruding from her belly. The white materia falls from her hair, pinging as they hit each pillar. She slumps into Cloud's arms. Aeris, the flower girl from the slums, the last of her race, is gone. Cloud cannot listen to Sephiroth's grand speech as he openly mocks him for his emotion, his burning eyes, his whole body on fire. He shouldn't be sad or angry, because he never truly cared. He has no mind of his own. This music continues to play as we fight another Jenova. You shouldn't be sad, Cloud, because you are a puppet. But no, that's not true. It scarcely even matters that Sephiroth has eluded us yet again. Aeris is gone. No words are even said. Tifa closes her eyes, strokes her hair, and runs off. And Yuffie simply takes Cloud in her arms and cries uncontrollably. Finally, Aeris is laid to rest. As she disappears under the waves, we realise the finality of it all. They won't be able to look back on those hard times and laugh. Aeris will never get to know Cloud. It didn't matter that they were perfect for each other. All of that's gone in a blinding flash of white light. And if it wasn't personal before, well, now it is. But there's still a problem. Cloud knows he should stop. He knows he's broken, that other forces are in play here. He knows that the other people in the group aren't just his partners, they're his keepers. They need to stick by him in case he ends up doing something terrible. The planet is in grave danger, the reunion is upon us, and the threat of ultimate destructive magic hangs over us. But Aeris is gone. And at this moment, for that reason more than any other, we choose to continue going north in search of the black-caped man. And it is here where Disc 1 comes to an end. Okay, so it's analysis time. And Disc 1 ended with pretty much the most famous moment in the whole game, so really we need to take a proper look at that first. There is no bigger spoiler in the whole history of video games than Aeris dies. You'd be hard pressed to find a single gamer who doesn't know about it. It's the closest gaming has to a Luke, I am your father moment. And despite how well known it is, it's no less effective because of that. It isn't the first major character death in an RPG, nor is it even the first in a Final Fantasy game. But it's not only the ubiquity of the game that makes it stick out, it's how masterful the scene actually is. It's not just all CGI cutscenes, there's a lot of gameplay elements to it. In the build-up, as Cloud draws his sword, you have to press the buttons to raise and swing. You can press other buttons to try and stop Cloud, but nothing progresses until you press action. Suddenly, Sephiroth isn't just controlling Cloud, he's controlling you. It's a worrying moment already, really. Doing something you don't want to do, turning gameplay on its head. A lot of games do that these days and get praised for it, but FF7 shows that it's not anything new. The moment itself also sticks out. Think of what usually happens with a death in video games. The cinematic qualities, the long drawn out speeches, the final breath goodbyes and epic no's. There's none of that here. The most famous death of all is just so sudden. Aeris is alive 1 second and dead the next. The one attempt at actually making a grand speech is shut down totally by the emotions of having a whole person suddenly just ripped out from your life in an instant. The only dialogue in the whole scene is between Cloud and Sephiroth, and considering what we know, that almost seems like a battle of the inner self. And with that music, no dialogue's really needed. It's a pretty ballsy moment to then, with that emotion still there, throw in a boss battle. The game's set up to try and ensure you don't fail it. So long as you equip the water in you get in the forest beforehand, there's no chance of losing. It's almost like the game wanted to provide a punching bag for your own emotions. The usual boss theme doesn't even play either. It's still that music. Again, it's gameplay and story mixing together, releasing the anger of the characters. But the most powerful moment of all, really, is the aftermath. I talked previously about FF7 using animations instead of words a lot of the time, and this is the pinnacle. There are no words here. This is a scene that almost couldn't be done today. There'd have to be words, there'd have to be a speech, it'd have to be half an hour long. But no, it's all stripped out. The reactions feel so genuine. Yuffie in particular has a reaction that pretty much gets me every time. And it continues on to the final CG cutscene with Cloud laying Aeris to rest. It's just so final. The loss of Aeris isn't meant to be just patched up. There's always going to be that big hole where she was, and it's not going to be fixed anytime soon. Perhaps your own reaction could depend on how much you've actually used Aeris up to this point, but seeing as she's always a constant in my party, yeah. The first time I played through the game, I was fortunate enough to actually not have this spoiled for me, despite the details being everywhere basically from the get-go. But if anything, the emotional impact is even greater now. You could call it a cliche, but there's honestly no scene that's quite like it in video games. Aeris' death is on its own. It's a scene that could have only occurred how it did with the impact it had in the context of a video game. This is video game storytelling at its peak, and quite frankly, there's not many things that have topped it since. Still, that's not all there is to Disc 1. We kinda have to look at the rest of it too, and provide thoughts and such. Actually, I have to be honest and say that the rest of Disc 1 is a little patchy. It's certainly the slowest part of the game, which is kind of a relief after Midgar, but does it perhaps go on for a little too long? We spend most of the time exploring our second characters, really. By the time we get to Barret, he's kind of become a supporting player, and his story's not that interesting to begin with. Red 13's is better, but it is still a diversion. You can also do Yuffie's side story as well, but I've saved that for another time. And of course there's still a couple more characters to introduce over the disc, and they all need time. So the plot doesn't really move much. We're always searching for Sephiroth, and he's always ahead. It's still good, but it's a definite slow burn. Of course, this doesn't last. When we get to Disc 2, the plot's going to seriously start moving forward, and when we finally do get plot at the end of Disc 1, it's worth waiting for. The game gradually sinks its hooks into you, and then right at the end of the disc, it pulls the hell out of them. In the end, Disc 1 gets away with it. Even if there's not a great deal of plot advancement after Midgar, it sets everything up nicely with constant allusions and questions. You still get a lot of Cloud's weirdness, but it's then followed up with Tifa behaving oddly too. You also get the constant references to Black Materia, the Temple of the Ancients and whatnot. And particularly after Nibelheim, you get the reunion and the clones milling about everywhere, which for me is one of the creepier parts of the whole game. The stream of side stories do a neat job of taking you away from all these subtle hints, so the story can set up a big payoff. And well, we're just getting started on that. One funny thing really is that Aeris' death, perhaps the most well-known and most spoiled event in any RPG, isn't even the biggest revelation in the whole game. We're just getting started. Disc 1's slow build is almost like putting off the inevitable, leaving you in limbo and refusing to pull the curtain back and show you just how screwed up things truly are. It works even better on a second playthrough, where you can pick out all the hints much more clearly, and see that, well, really things were kind of screwed up from the beginning, and that you never really had even the faintest whiff of a chance. Cheerful, isn't it? Still, at least there's guys like Cid to provide occasional moments of brevity. And talking of which, why don't we grab our captain for our first bit of character analysis? Cid has been many things throughout the history of the Final Fantasy games. A knight, an engineer, a headmaster. Funnily enough, the majority of Cids are all somewhat associated with engineering, even with airships specifically, and that's certainly true of Lys, the most famous Cid of all. Of all the characters in FF7, Cid is perhaps the one that's universally liked, because, well, he is your typical badass. His introduction alone is spectacular, and his actual design is awesome. The goggles, the ever-present cigarette, and the spear. It's actually perhaps the most old-school design of all FF7 characters. Cid's whole look is a throwback to the Dragoon class of early Final Fantasy games. He also happens to get a whole bunch of the game's funniest lines. There's a sense, especially after the personal stories we've had and the extreme depression of Nibelheim, that the plot of FF7 is becoming a lot more introverted and withdrawn. So it comes as quite a shock when we bump into Cid, as loud a personality as you'll find. Still, there's a bit more to Cid than being a random badass line generator and saying, "Glad to be aboard, numbskulls." Oddly enough, I don't think we're meant to fully like him. For all his badassery, he certainly does have a nasty streak, and it gets shown off from time to time, especially with Shira, his, well, assistant, really. Cid kind of takes all of his frustrations out on Shira due to the failure of the rocket launch, resulting in an incredibly abusive relationship, and Shira herself almost seems to be a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. It's a very weird relationship to have for someone who's supposed to be one of the heroes. It's perhaps not spoiling too much to say that there is a curve here, and there is a big moment where Cid finally mellows out when it comes to Shira, but at the start, yeah, some of the other characters seem to get it right, actively questioning this relationship. It is a weird moment in the game, an issue that a lot of games wouldn't even touch with a 10-foot barge pole. I don't know how well FF7 handles it, to be honest. It always gave me mixed feelings about Cid, but then maybe that was the intention all along. So yeah, there's still some depression going on here, that's for sure. Okay, let's delve a little bit more into thematics. Previously we looked at FF7's environmental bent. One thing I always enjoyed about FF7 was how it deals with the most traditional RPG mechanics and cliches, and actually bothers to construct detailed explanations for all of them that don't just feel shoehorned in. Ever since the dawning of the RPG, there's some things you just accept. You know that there's going to be a bunch of monsters milling about the world, and you know that apparently normal looking people are going to be capable of crazy things, such as casting magic and whatnot. Usually monsters are thought of as, at best, possessed souls. Once upon a time they might have been normal, but now they're just an abomination. And unless they end up just being henchmen, not much explanation goes into them aside from that. FF7 is firmly on the possessed soul side to boot, but offers a little bit more grounding. It's still fantastical, but it explores the situation a little more, saying that the reason for the existence of monsters is due, in part, to the polluted nature of the world. Shinra's scientific experiments and refining of Mako has created a severe imbalance in the world, and this is how the planet has reacted to that. But there's perhaps an even larger cause at play. This is going a little into Disc 2 analysis, but we'll roll with it still. It's pretty clear once you get further and further north that the world in FF7 is recovering from an incredibly severe crisis that almost destroyed the planet, and we're still not all that far into the recovery process. Because after all, a lot of that boils down to Jenova and what it did to the planet. It's implied, although not said outright, that Jenova, as opposed to flat out killing the ancients, actually turned most of them into monsters, the abominations we see day in and day out. It even provides multiple reasons for the possible existence of all these creatures. The use of magic also ties in with the game's themes. It's explained that magic comes from Materia, rocks of solidified Lifestream that can be used by people. Lifestream is, of course, the blood of the planet. So when you cast that Bolt 3 or whatever, you're using, well, not even 1/1000th of the planet's resources to do something like that. so this justifies the amount of damage that something like Meteor could do. Magic is that central to the game's plot and how it all wraps up in the end. It's not just a mechanic, it's a case where a mechanic becomes the entire cornerstone of the game's story. As we go on, we'll see another deconstruction of the RPG cliche, that of the regular grunt. But to go into that would be seriously spoiling things for the time being. Even something like the disconnection between cities can be explained, almost, by what the Shinra do. We're so used, especially in older RPGs like this one, to seeing no pathways at all between cities and the like. But think back to Midgar. Did you even see that many roads there connecting the sectors? It's clear that the Shinra at some point became purely concerned with the production of Mako and nothing else. They let cities fall into disrepute because they knew what made the most money and saw no reason to plunge their resources into anything else. So with that in mind, do you really expect to see a proper transport system? Again, it provides a neat explanation for a well-worn cliche and drives home just how dystopian FF7's world is. It almost doesn't seem so from the outset, but as you travel it's clear just how broken everything is. It's a world where something terrible has happened and it hasn't even found its feet again yet, thus allowing the Shinra to step in and take advantage. Huge themes like that are certainly a part of FF7, but another important part of the game for me is its personal edge. Despite being one of the biggest games ever made, FF7 is an intensely personal work. Not something you usually see all that much of in games, especially not at this level. And a lot of that personal stuff is about loss. It's a somewhat well-known fact that during the production of FF7, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the series, lost his mother. And that seems to inform a lot of the characters' backgrounds, if you think about it. Of those whom we know about who have parents, we know that Cloud's mother and Tifa's father died at Nibelheim. Later we find out that Tifa's mother is also dead. Aeris' real mother and father are both dead. Red 13's mother and father are dead too, and he always thought of his father as a coward. Both Aeris and Red also think of themselves as the last of their race. We don't know about Barret's parents, but we know that he is a guardian to Marlene, who also lost her biological parents, as Elmira is a guardian to Aeris, and Barret also lost his wife. And then of course, there's Sephiroth. It's hard to tell which of Genova and the completely unknown Lucretia is the biological parent or the guardian. In the case of someone like Cloud in particular, I wonder if FF7 is, at heart, a game about the loss of parental guidance. Of losing that early on in your life and not being ready for it, of having to make those steps forward and dealing with life after your mother or father have gone. As far as death itself goes, it's also known that Aeris' death was planned very early on in the game's development. Yoshinori Kitase explains the motivations behind the scene best. Death comes suddenly and there is no notion of good or bad attached to it. It leaves, not a dramatic feeling, but a great emptiness. When you lose someone you loved very much, you feel this big empty space and think, if I had known this was coming, I would have done things differently. These are the feelings I wanted to arouse in the players with Aeris' death relatively early in the game. I wonder how this phrase applies to the players of FF7. One thing I always note when seeing or participating in discussions on Aeris' death is how much people used Aeris as a character before her death, and how that affects the scene. If they didn't use her, whether they knew about the scene or not, they tend to be less affected by it. And if, like me, you use Aeris constantly, you've built up that relationship between yourself and the character, and it becomes affecting. One other point though. For those who've played through FF7 multiple times, say you didn't use Aeris on the first playthrough, would you then use her on the second? To make the most of her while she's around? The odd thing about a game is that, in a sense, you can see it coming, and you can do things differently. As we get into Disc 2, we'll also be struggling with the loss of identity in quite a hefty way. However, we have certainly had hints before then. One thing I notice how often Cloud reaffirms his identity to everybody. How often does he say something along the lines of, I'm Cloud, formerly of Soldier, born in Nibelheim? He says it so much it becomes quite noticeable. These are the things he knows about himself, that he holds true. And yet there's so many gaps. And then, when Sephiroth takes control of him, we understand. Cloud's identity is, well, pretty weak to say the least. It's surprising just how little we know about a lot of our main characters at this stage. Cloud is our main hero, and we know virtually nothing aside from what little information he can piece together inside his head. Tifa's kind of similar in that she's so clearly hiding something, a secret so huge that she knows it will tear the group apart. It's all rather worrying, putting it mildly. And it's one of the moments where the game really sinks those claws in. If Cloud, the main hero, the person we've been relying on all this time, is this broken, then well, what chance have we got? Did we ever have a chance at all, in fact? As we get into Disc 2, we're going to be dealing with this a hell of a lot more. Let's relax with one of the game's lighter characters now, as well as one of my least favourite to boot. Yeah, Cait Sith. He's an odd duck. He's not exactly a favourite for a lot of people, and I'd probably consider him my second least favourite of all the characters. He's just a bit of an arse. Think about it, the guy just joins your party without even asking permission, turns out to be a spy, tries to redeem himself somewhat by sacrificing his body for the good of the planet, and then comes back at basically the most inopportune time ever. Also, he kidnaps Marlene. That's pretty much what we know so far, anyway. He's such an odd character when it comes to battles too. He's good with magic and has a ton of health, but he is pretty weak physically without having those godlike Aeris limits. Hell, his limits are the weirdest of the lot. He has one where he does a random amount of damage with some dice, and the other is a slot machine that can do just about anything, including kill your entire party in one bloody hit. It's hard to think of much of a use for Cait Sith, and because of that, I barely use him. Still, he does have a character arc of sorts. He starts out as the jokey character, then kind of turns evil, and then, later on in Disc 2, he becomes a wee bit more useful in our quest. Of course we know that he's a Shinra spy, but the question is, who? It's kind of easy to figure it out, although the game is never explicit with it. Cait Sith is Reeve, the one member of Shinra's big board who always seemed to disagree with President Shinra's latest plan to destroy an entire city in order to get back at Avalanche. This sort of moral compass at least points the finger towards him, anyway. He also manages to save the group from a few tough scrapes, and gives us plenty of information about what the Shinra are getting up to, which does at least redeem him somewhat. Still, I virtually never use him. If I have the services of a Super X soldier, a badass pilot, and a bloodthirsty Wutai princess, all of whom usually deal 9999 damage at all times by game's end, I don't tend to have much use for a cat on a giant doll. Right, let's have a look at FF7's script, shall we? It's kind of an odd duck, as the writing's not really of the sort you find in games. The writers of FF7 had a distinct approach in mind, that being of extreme realism. Believe it or not, they wanted the dialogue to sound as natural as possible and for it to have a certain grittiness about it. To some extent, this is why, weirdly for a game made in 1997, Final Fantasy VII is littered with swear words. I imagine this was the first time that a lot of gamers had ever seen the word shit inside a game. Certainly was for me. But from a pure dialogue writing perspective, it means that there's a lot of beats, a lot of stumbling over words, a lot of dropping certain letters. A lot of the more get-up-and-go characters like Cloud and Cid always seem to drop their Gs. It's hardly consistent, for reasons we'll get into soon enough, but it does add a nice touch when it comes to making the dialogue sound good in your head. It certainly sounds a lot better there than it would do if it were voiced by some disinterested actor and directed by someone who didn't have the first damn clue about that sort of thing. The extreme realism approach is also why you get quite a lot of animations, nods of the head, and largely wordless sequences, such as Aeris' death, of course, or Elmira's flashback. It's here where the writing really shines, simply because the writers recognise that sometimes words don't even need to be said. So considering the generally low standard of writing stories and scripts in games around this time, seeing as it was still a bit of a new thing, Final Fantasy VII really does shine in parts. It's a shame then that the translation, alas, barely does it any justice. There are some rather famous moments here, of course. Who could possibly forget "This guy are sick"? but sometimes the translation is such that sequences just don't make any sense at all. You get dialogue that appears to be assigned to the wrong character, or, well, just garbled crap. Lines that have completely had any meaning ripped out of them. Now this is a nigh on 60-hour RPG, so they can't all be winners, and this was around the time when people were still coming to grips with actually bothering to do any kind of decent translation job at all. Not every company was of that working designs level, or whatever, and if Final Fantasy VII feels like it was translated by a group of people who probably lied about being bilingual on their CV, but in truth were sweating over a well-thumbed Japanese-English dictionary the whole time, well, that's probably because it was, and it's not like it was a massive priority for most games back then. Japanese to English translation is a very hard task that doesn't usually get much time and resources devoted to it, and so you kinda have to pick through the dialogue with a fine tooth comb to see the parts where it actually does shine through the sadly quite botched translation job. There is a definite vision there that's very much unlike the majority of games ever released, but it tends to get fogged up quite a lot of the time. For our next bout of character analysis, let's have a look at the family lion-wolf hybrid. Red 13, Nanaki, whatever you want to call him. He has a rather odd progression in that he starts out really quite annoying, but then gets quite a bit better as time goes along. Seriously, the first time he comes in, he's all pseudy and the like, purposefully mysterious and too good for any of this, and frankly you just want to slap the bastard. Okay, that's probably a bit much, but it's not all that endearing. He also has the odd distinction of being both the oldest in the group, 48, and the youngest too, seeing as his age is apparently only equivalent to about 16 in human years. He's a lot better by the time he gets to Cosmo Canyon, as he at least feels like a supporting character who's been, if not pulled into our story, but almost taken in by it. At first he doesn't want to do much other than hitch a ride, but the Kalm flashback draws him in. His own story, of the ones we get for supporting characters in Disc 1, is certainly a fair bit more interesting than Barret's, even if it is a simple coming-of-age story. One of the things I do generally like about the character is his constant worry that he might become a monster. He certainly sticks out amongst a group that largely consists of humans, even our stuffed toy cat is controlled by one. He's different though, and he could have easily been someone who we'd fight against, particularly if Hojo had been able to experiment on him for any length of time. As the Genova cells become ever more important to the plot, it becomes a bit more of a worry, and although he doesn't have a particularly big character arc, the thought that things could have been so different humbles him as he gets closer to the group. Still, he's mainly prized for what he offers in combat. He's a pretty strong character, and he usually spends quite a bit of time in my party early on, at least until Sid comes in. He gets a grotesquely overpowered weapon after Cosmo Canyon, and if you upgrade his strength with that, yeah, you won't have much trouble when it comes to fights. He ends up being a capable enough all-rounder, really. He's fairly average story-wise, but not a bad character. Okay, finally, let's revisit two characters we've already looked at. It's certainly something to see how Cloud has progressed since Midgar, cause well, things have gotten a whole lot more complex. It's obviously pretty common for characters to get a bit of self-doubt going. Hell, damn near every character in this game has some at one point or another. But this is more than self-doubt. It's more like self-erasure. It's quite shocking when it happens, and you finally realise that Sephiroth has some sort of control over Cloud, and that he might not exactly be the person he's always said he was. It's kind of a worry too, as throughout Disc 1 you've come to rely on Cloud just about every step of the way. You can't really exaggerate just how useful Cloud is, particularly in combat. He's the absolute best character. He isn't just an all-rounder, he's a master of all trades and a jack of none. The best attacks, the best magic, the best everything. But then, you can't really trust him anymore. And you wonder just where he's been leading us all this time. It's quite the move. If there's one thing you can usually count on in a game, it's that you're going to be able to trust your main character. They're always going to be doing the right thing. And then, FF7 goes ahead and introduces a bit of unreliable narration into the mix. They don't just give Cloud faults, they tear everything you thought you'd figured out about the character to pieces. And so the emo accusations start up again, perhaps with a little bit more force behind them this time. This characterisation was certainly a bit influential, and gave way too many a hero that was filled with similar doubts, who didn't really know what they were doing, who felt like they were living a lie. That's not so much Cloud's fault though. The relationships change more as you realise the fragility of our group, how everyone, particularly Tifa and Aeris, were trying to hold Cloud together. Tifa's worry when Zack gets mentioned in Gongaga is clearly connected to previous events. It's as if she doesn't want Cloud to actually think about anything, because there's a danger that if he does, the whole edifice might crumble. Needless to say, things are going to get a whole lot worse for Cloud before we're done. And then there's Aeris, who we also have to look at closely now, as her arc comes to an end. Back in Midgar, she was largely a bit of a damsel in distress, albeit one with some rather fun traits that made her appealing. And of course, she's a boss in combat. You'll notice that Aeris was basically in my party for the whole of the disc. It's not just because I like the character, it's because she pretty much kicks ass if you take the time to use her and up her limits. With Aeris, your party is pretty close to immortal. Indeed, 2 of her limits make the party literally immortal. And this fits in with Aeris' character because in the end, she was the one who was holding the group together most of all. As the last of the Ancients, she knew that she had quite a large responsibility. She also knew that, despite all the battles and whatnot, she was probably going to be the person who'd be best placed to save the planet. Aeris stops being a damsel and becomes kind of like the group's mother figure. Not in an ethereal sense, as she certainly dishes out a bit of tough love every once in a while, but in the sense that she becomes the group's guide, leading them ever closer to the temple and the forgotten capital. When you think about it, she was the only person who truly had a plan for dealing with Sephiroth. The rest of them wanted to chase Sephiroth, and we had the Black Materia. But even if Cloud hadn't been controlled by Sephiroth, what were we actually going to do with it? Did we know? Would we just hold on to it forever? Everyone else was making things up on the fly, but Aeris had a plan. Alas, it was cut short. When Aeris dies, the party pretty much goes to hell. It's chaotic from here on out, because she was the one who really held things together and was able to manage Cloud effectively. You're greeted with such a massive gap after her death, because that's what it's supposed to feel like. The group's now totally without guidance. But through all this, she never really attains any special powers or anything like that. She's still very much the normal girl. And that's what I've always liked about Aeris, and why she's my favourite character in the game. The EU does tend to lionise her quite a lot, turning her into a waif-like figure with the weight of the planet on her shoulders, or saying that she's this crazy awesome girl who you could picture yourself marrying. But in the end, she's really just quite normal. She's responsible and caring, but she likes a laugh and knows how to have fun. She feels quite naturally written, despite the botched translation. And well, you don't see all that many characters like her in games. Everyone's so special, big and fantastical. And hell, Aeris is, in a way. But as far as personality goes, she's actually quite relatable. You can recognise her. And that deserves quite a lot of praise, really. Back to the plot then. We're back at the Forgotten Capital, with only one direction we can go in. Sephiroth tells Cloud that he's heading north, past the snowfields. To get there, we make our way through a nice little cave. It's quite pretty, a nice bit of pre-rendered goodness. Back on the map, it's pretty clear that we've reached the ice level. Equip those fire elementals and added effects, and then, eventually, we end up at perhaps the single most gorgeous location in the game. Just look at it. It's Icicle. And, yeah, they just don't make them like this anymore. I could wax lyrical about this one picture, not to mention the music, for ages. It's almost as if it was painted by the godly hand of Bob Ross himself. We do get quite an interesting plot detail here. One of the houses used to belong to Professor Gast, he who mentored Sephiroth and was head of science at Shinra before Hojo. His house contains a few tapes. These are of Professor Gast interviewing none other than Ifalna, Aeris' real mother. We learn more about Jenova and how he, for despite the feminine appearance and Sephiroth referring to Jenova as mother, that's how they appeared then, set about virtually wiping the Cetra off the planet. She also talks about something called Weapon. Weapon was created after the calamity so many years ago by the planet itself as a defence system. As Jenova is, at this point, still alive, the weapons have not gone away and still rest somewhere on the planet. While Jenova is still around, the planet can never truly heal itself. We're close to the crater where the original injection took place, as it happens. There's a great deal of spirit energy here. Maybe we're finally reaching the promised land? The other two tapes are a bit, well, less formal. Turns out Professor Gast and Ifalna are in a loving relationship. And suddenly, they have a daughter. So yes, Aeris's father was Professor Gast. A few days after her birth, Hojo hunts Gast and Ifalna down with Shinra troops in tow. They capture Ifalna and the baby Aeris and basically murder Gast in cold blood. Again, this is all optional plot exposition, but really it's important to know. And you are a silly person if you don't spend half your RPG time going into every house and searching it with a fine-tooth comb. Who knows how many potions and ethers you'd have missed by now? Anyway, the Turks, well, Elena at least, have tracked us to here. We haven't seen much of Elena at this point, but she is, well, the dumb one. Although honestly, the Turks have pretty much always been comic relief. That's nothing new. Elena thinks we busted up Sen way back in the temple, and she's going to pay us back in punch dollars. That, naturally, we don't accept. Ah, poor Elena. Off she rolls. To continue north, we have to find a way past the steep and dangerous path towards the Great Glacier. So, we steal a map from an inn's wall, convince, well, force a busted up kid to give us his snowboard, and find out about some guy named Holzoff who's disappeared in the mountains years ago. His wife's convinced he's still alive though. Bless. Anyway, it's time for the snowboard minigame. Gotta say, this is my favourite minigame of them all. Seriously, I used to play it for hours at the Gold Saucer. Anyway, we only get to do it once for now, sadly. But eventually, we fly off the slope, and we end up in the Great Glacier. And yeah, it's also a beautiful place. And I think most people will agree, a very annoying place. It's huge and confusing. You've got to use the map to get around, and it sure as hell isn't any kind of Elder Scrolls fast travel type thing. You've got to look at the landmarks to figure out where you are. You know, like an actual map. Anyway, there's a lot of rare treasure here, so I pick up as much as I can. I want added cut, at least. But eventually, Cloud ends up passing out before too long. Which is cool because, seriously, screw going in that area where there is nothing but snow, the camera moves about, and you have to use markers to know where you are. In all my playthroughs of the game, I think I've got through this once without actually passing out. Anyway, we wake up at someone's house. And it's that guy named Holzoff. He didn't die in the mountains years ago. He ended up staying here in order to help anyone who's going to climb the mountain. And his poor wife doesn't know a fin about it. What a bastard, eh? At least he gets us prepared for the next part of the journey. So, we get our party together. Now that Aeris is gone, we kinda have two spaces to fill. For a change, I roll with Sid and Barret. Sid is a beast at the moment, with an awesome weapon and the champion belt. He even does more physical damage than Cloud, enough to massacre anything that moves. That's 7,000 damage there? It's a critical from his level 1 limit. Anyway, the deal here is that you climb up the cliff, and whenever you reach the ledge, you hammer square to increase your body temperature. If it goes too low, you pass out again and end up back at Holzoff's. It's easy enough so long as you remember to hammer square on every ledge. The way's also peppered with a couple of little dungeons. I'm sure everyone remembers these bloody annoying stalactites, don't they? And of course, there's a boss at the end. Typical dungeon crawling type stuff, quite tricky to boot, but nothing the party can't handle. We may not have Aeris around to make the party invincible anymore, but we are still capable. Finally though, the fun's over. You're going to want to sit tight and prick your ears right up for this next part. We reach the crater itself, Jenova's original landing site. Tifa decides to join in at this point, seeing as she's got a bit of a score to settle with Sephiroth too. And guess what? We're not the only ones here. The Shinra have been chasing Sephiroth too, thinking that he'll lead them to the Promised Land, and they know he's kicking around here. The clones have also all made their way here. We get a pretty straight path, following the shuffling figures along, closer and closer, and once again, we find Sephiroth. The clones have had a wasted journey. The few who make it are summarily executed. Sephiroth is, as ever, mysterious and dismissive, knowing that he's still in control, but then he agrees that it is the end. of this body's usefulness. Suddenly, we're fighting Jenova again. Weirdly enough, it's another simple fight, but there is a bit of a revelation here. What did that last sentence mean? Think on it. We haven't been chasing Sephiroth all this time, we've actually been chasing Jenova. Way back at the Shinra HQ, it wasn't Sephiroth who suddenly broke in and took Jenova out of its container. No, Jenova was woken up. It took Sephiroth's form and escaped by itself. The whole idea of Jenova, the way it destroyed the Ancients all those years back, is that it can mimic anything, like an ungodly T-1000. And so that's what happened. Jenova escaped all by itself. Or rather, something willed Jenova to escape and come all the way here. And Cloud knows the answer. The real Sephiroth, the one who still very much desires godhood and control over the planet, lies just beyond. For now, the black materia is right there on the ground. Cloud picks it up. We can at least hang on to that. While we have this, nothing bad can happen, right? Though perhaps it's better if Cloud not have it this time, so we give it to Barret instead. His mind perhaps isn't quite as screwed up. Cloud and Tifa move on, in search of the real Sephiroth. And then, boom, cut to white. Suddenly we're not in Kansas, the North Crater anymore. No, we're in Nibelheim. We see a scene from the flashback again, with Sephiroth instructing the group, and more specifically, a man who carries a big sword on his back and has spiky hair. Spiky black hair. Not Cloud. It's an illusion, surely, created by Sephiroth. It's all lies. Cloud remains unaffected. Cut to another scene, the aftermath, the town on fire. The man with black hair rushes out of the Shinra mansion, is asked about his sanity, told to check that house. Cloud remains strong, but Tifa seems troubled by this whole thing. Sephiroth finally appears in the illusion. Cloud stands his ground. He knows what Sephiroth wants him to say. But how can that be? He remembers everything. This whole scene was clear enough to us in the flashback, wasn't it? Were those fires not utterly vivid? Sephiroth remains unconvinced. He says that this isn't an illusion, this is reality. Cloud's memories are the illusion. Yeah, we are through the looking glass. Sephiroth confronts Cloud with his truth. He says that Cloud was a failed experiment, constructed by Hojo after the Nibelheim incident in his desire to prove the Jenova reunion theory. In other words, he's another clone. Only he wasn't like the others. He was a failure. Cloud wasn't even given a number, in fact. Cloud remains steadfast to his own truth, but, well, we know about the flashbacks, don't we? We saw what happened at the temple. We know this, and Tifa seems to know it too. And yet Tifa talks about those childhood memories. Don't you remember the well? The promise? What about that? But even that isn't sacred. Tifa isn't sure of those memories. Something's odd. They were almost too perfect, weren't they? Remember that Jenova can assume the guise of anything, and if Cloud is a clone, Jenova cells are inside him. So Jenova has merged with Tifa's memories inside Cloud's head, creating Cloud's personality and his childhood. Someone named Cloud? Well, it could just be a small part of those memories. A name, even. For as a clone, it's not like Cloud actually had a name in the first place. Now, how would you like to see a picture? Do you recall the one that was taken just before we headed off to Mount Nibel? We get to see it. There's Sephiroth, there's Tifa, and there's that man with the black hair. Tifa's trying to get Cloud not to think about all of this, as the evidence continues to mount. As he has often done, Cloud reinforces his own identity. He came to Nibelheim, he saw the town, he saw his mother, he played the piano. It was his first mission after becoming a first-class soldier. And there, the killer blow lands. Cloud realises that he doesn't remember when he even joined Soldier in the first place. With one cornerstone removed, the entire edifice crumbles. Suddenly, the memories have eaten themselves. Now, well, that's obviously a lot of information to take in. And no, it doesn't really stop there either. Why don't we pause for a breath for a moment? We can at least see what the Shinra are up to. They've arrived at what they believe to be the Promised Land, a cave made entirely out of materia, with enough Mako for 1,000 Midgars. Rufus and Scarlet act as though they've found the lost city of gold, while Hojo remains unconvinced. And suddenly an eye peers out at them. Oh, who's that then? You remember Gast's tapes, don't you? Hojo does. That eye belongs to Weapon. The planet's in danger, now more than ever. And so what are we seeing here? Is the planet's defense system waking up? Pause, on your marks, get set, go. We're back with the rest of the party. Tifa suddenly rushes to Barret and tells him to come quick because Cloud's in trouble. And so, naturally, he does. And then we see that it wasn't Tifa at all. Jenova had one final call to make. Cut back to the so-called Promised Land, where all of a sudden, Cloud appears right in front of the Shinra crew, who are a bit shocked by this, obviously. Barret and Tifa, the real one this time, also arrive. And, well, we see it. Cloud goes up to Barret and asks for the black materia. Tifa is like the image of young Cloud back at the temple. She can shout at Cloud, beg him to stop, but Cloud cannot hear her. Barret gives the black materia to Cloud, whoever that is now. There's nothing but a shell who has accepted his fate, who doesn't even have an identity. He apologises to everyone for what he is about to do, for pretending that he was someone else. Hojo is overjoyed here, as his Jenova reunion theory has been proven, that Jenova would call the clones back here so that Jenova could become whole again, in a sense. In one last desperate grasp for identity, Cloud pleads with Hojo to give him a number, but his existence is disavowed. Merely a failed experiment. Cloud is nothing. Still, some questions remain. Why wouldn't the clones just go to Midgar, where Jenova had been stored? The answer is simple. Of course, the real Sephiroth is right here. Sephiroth did die 5 years ago, but his will was strong, too strong for the Lifestream to fully absorb him. His will called for Jenova, who broke out of Shinra HQ, to come here. His will called for the black materia so that his plan could be carried out. His will called for the clones to come here so that everything could be made whole, and his will called for Cloud because those cells are inside him too. The line is crucial. I wasn't chasing Sephiroth, I was being summoned by Sephiroth. Hojo couldn't be happier about what's going to happen next, for there is nothing else left to do. Cloud places the black materia inside the real Sephiroth's cocoon. And, well, the mission is accomplished. At this very instant, Weapon awakes and breaks out, with the planet now in grave danger. Sapphire, Diamond, Ultima, Ruby, Emerald. Nothing can stop the casting of Meteor now. Sephiroth's will is complete. Shinra and the rest of our crew evacuate immediately. And Cloud? Nothing. Quite simply, nothing. Another flashback tells us a bit more. It's Tifa's this time. We see how they met again, Cloud a semi-conscious mess on the steps of Sector 7 station. He sees Tifa and, all of a sudden, becomes invigorated. He still freaks out though. One little string was given to him, and from there an entire set of memories was constructed in an instant. Such is the power of Jenova, I suppose. But always had that thought at the back of her mind that something just flat out wasn't right, that things didn't add up. And so she took Cloud on, told him about Avalanche, and gave him a purpose. So she could watch over him, perhaps? Maybe even protect him? Well, everyone makes mistakes, don't they? So we know all about Tifa's own neuroses now, that impending feeling of getting ever closer to opening up Pandora's box. In the end, though, it is all Sephiroth's doing. And his plan? Well, it succeeded. Time passes. Who knows how long. We see Tifa waking from a long rest, with Barret by her side. Cloud is nowhere to be found. Where are we? We're at Shinra's HQ in Upper Junon. And, well, what happened while Tifa was out? Well, why don't you just go ahead and look out the window? The die is cast. The calamity is in the skies. Meteor stares blankly at us all. The weapons are running about too. As a matter of fact, they're on a tear, raiding and destroying whatever they find. After all, they protect the planet, and its occupants are the threat. Barret even has some newfound respect for Rufus, who's trying to fight it at every step. 'Cause hell, nobody wants to die, do they? In fact, Rufus is here now, and we can show him a bit of that respect. Well, at least until he informs us that we're going to be executed on national TV. Because there isn't any hope, is there? And what do you look for if you don't have any hope? That's right. Blame. Executing the leaders of Avalanche will put people's minds off that big red blob in the sky, at least for a few seconds. Yeah, whatever. Off we go to the scaffold. Scarlet, obnoxious as ever, sticks Tifa in the gas chamber first, being an arsehole every step of the way and delivering a trademark slap as she's strapped in. She even takes time out for an interview with an extremely fat journalist. Then all of a sudden, a call comes up. Weapon is attacking, right now. The barriers are raised, everything mobilises, and the main cannon is prepared. The cannon is fired. Weapon is still advancing. The end appears to be coming sooner than expected. Still, it won't stop Scarlet from talking to this journalist, who suddenly pepper sprays her. You may have been wondering where everyone else was, and, well, Cait Sith's come to the rescue at least. However, we can't open the door. We need to find another way, just as the gas starts seeping into the chamber. There is nothing for it. We need to rush to the airport. We're riding on sheer chance at this moment, just as Weapon arrives. This one happens to be Sapphire Weapon. There is perhaps one small hope for Tifa. In classic fashion, a key's been left on the floor. If you can just make a movement here, a movement there, closer and closer... Suddenly we're out of our restraints. We can turn the gas off. But we still can't get out of here. Weapon readies a massive beam that opens a huge scar in this fortress, and luck's with us again, as it just so happens to open up Tifa's room. Finally, as Weapon readies a second strike, the massive cannon fires at point-blank range, taking Sapphire Weapon's head off. 1 down, 4 to go. A revived Scarlet chases Tifa all the way onto the cannon, where they have a bit of a slap fight. Still, Tifa is cornered. At least until that almighty airship rears into view, Barret telling Tifa to run and jump for that golden shiny wire of hope. We're free once again, and we just so happen to have a brand new ride. As it turns out, the rest of our heroes are aboard the Highwind as well, waiting for their moment to strike and rescue Barret and Tifa. Tifa gets quite excited, especially as everyone's here. So off to the cockpit she goes. And indeed, everyone is here. Well, everyone except Cloud, who sadly was the only person Tifa really wanted to see. The rest of our gang are chipper enough. A now fully redeemed Cait Sith says that he'll give us all the information we need on Shinra. Cid's got an airship that makes the tiny Bronco look like a paper plane, and even Vincent is relatively cheerful for such a depressed sod. But Tifa's not happy. Cloud's not here, and no one knows where he is. All we can gather is that he probably ended up falling in the Lifestream when the weapons broke free, meaning that he's either possibly washed up somewhere in the South Seas, or dead from extreme Mako poisoning. The latter is, needless to say, a lot likelier. In any case, Tifa is desperate for any small chance of seeing Cloud again, so we head off to the South Seas, to one town we haven't visited yet, Midgar. That is after spending a good amount of time screwing about in the Highwind first. Seriously, we can fly anywhere now, go back and visit just about any place we've been to. Still, you can always see the meteor hanging over us. The map music's changed too, to something altogether more depressing. It's Final Fantasy VII's World of Ruin moment, basically. Also, the North Crater is now blocked off by a gigantic barrier, so no one can get to the sleeping Sephiroth. It's kind of fun going around everywhere though now, and seeing NPCs' reactions to current events. It's a nice detail that makes it worth doing, now that we can fly around the world in seconds. Still, if we want to keep going, we've got to go to Midgar and face the inevitable. Midgar is sort of like Rocket Town, aside from the obvious difference. It's a largely stagnant holiday resort. That's obviously nothing new, although the presence of a big rock in the sky that's heading straight for us isn't going to do much for the quality of life. Still, there's sad dogs to pet, so it isn't too bad. Suddenly though, Tifa overhears a conversation about a young man with spiky hair washed up on the shore. Of all the chances. Today's the day we hit double zeros, folks. Cloud is here, and more than that, he's still alive. He's in the clinic in the north of the town. Naturally, Tifa rushes over, not thinking about anything else except seeing him again. And what does she find? It's almost too hard to face. Cloud is, well, nothing. Unresponsive, in another world. The doctor talks about extreme Mako poisoning, of being exposed to so much knowledge in the Lifestream that it's a miracle Cloud's even here at all, but he likely can't even recognise us at this stage. Essentially, well, he's brain damaged. As we know, Tifa only wishes to see Cloud, and now what with seeing him like this, she only wants to be by his side. So we've no choice but to leave Tifa here in Midgar. We hoped we'd gain a member of our crew back, but, well, looks like we've lost another. But it's not like we can stop, really. Shinra have an idea, and Cait's going to tell us all about it. They're going to take something called huge materia, massive rocks of the stuff, from their reactors in Nibelheim, Corel, and at a place called Fort Condor. The aim is to basically use the power of these rocks to hurl them at Meteor, thus smashing the rock into pieces. It doesn't seem like a particularly smart plan, and it probably won't work, although we don't exactly have much in the way of ideas ourselves. Still, we are going to stop the Shinra from doing this. This is a bit of a leap in logic, really, but, well, we hate the Shinra, and whatever they do ain't going to be any good for the people, so we are going to stop them. But we do need a leader. Barret starts talking about being the leader, getting the whole Avalanche band back together, but he knows he's no leader. So who else can we turn to? Well, let me ask you this. Who's the captain of the ship? There's only one guy who's got the stones for this job, and it's Cid. So for the time being, Cid is our leader, the captain of the ship, and the captain of our hearts. First off, we're heading for Corel. It's quite likely that Shinra's mission to take the materia out of that reactor isn't exactly going to improve the town, so yeah, we don't want to screw things up there any further. When we reach the reactor, we see them taking the materia out by way of a train. Naturally, we take off in another carriage in hot pursuit. Cid may not be a train driver, but he can pick it up quickly enough. Soon enough, we're on the big train and busting up everything we see. Needless to say, our strongest opponent was the last one. One brave guard who gave his life to protect the materia. Still, we kick the shit out of him. The train itself is on a collision course straight for North Corel, but thankfully we managed to stop it just in time. The town, or what's left of it, is saved. And so we have brought a proper ending to Barret's story arc. By saving North Corel from a second bout of destruction, he's redeemed. The miners are in good spirits. Hell, they'll dig a tunnel and survive the meteor that way. Whatever gets you to sleep at night, I guess. 1 materia down, 3 more to go. Next up, a place called Fort Condor. It's been open to us for a while, but we've never really bothered with it. There's a disused reactor inside there, and Shinra are manning their troops for one big-ass push. So, we've got to stop them. And we do this by playing a, frankly boring and rubbish real-time strategy minigame. This is why we've not really visited. Still, it is pretty easy, and we win without much in the way of problems. Suddenly, at the end of the battle, the gigantic egg at the top explodes into magic, and the big condor on the top of the fort falls off, dead. What the hell happened? Well, the condor gave birth. We go up top just in time to see a massive bird fly away, and to pick up Phoenix, another quite awesome materia. And so, another huge materia is in our hands. 2 down. Having thwarted Shinra twice over, things go quiet, and Cait can't get much of a lead. So what now? Well, maybe we should pay our friends a little visit and see how they're holding up. We're off to Midgar. Alas, things are still kind of as crap as ever at Midgar. Tifa has kept a vigil at Cloud's side constantly, and is starting to feel the effects of that. Cloud's condition is completely unchanged. Things don't look good. And guess what? Things are about to get a whole lot worse. Suddenly, a weapon arrives for a raid. The Lifestream starts to rise to the surface, and Midgar doesn't exactly have a big cannon with which to deal with these behemoths. Looks like it's down to us. And so, we have our first proper fight with a weapon. This one's Ultima. It's all about survival, really. The fight doesn't last all that long, and we don't kill the weapon, but we at least give it a few bruises and, hell, it didn't kill us, so we're cool. But as weapon leaves, a massive quake begins. The Lifestream's going to rip the frickin' town apart. Before getting the hell away ourselves, we vainly try to tell Tifa to escape with Cloud, and damn it, they really do try. But it's too late. Tifa and the semi-conscious Cloud fall into the Lifestream. And well, we've seen what happens to people who fall into the Lifestream. They either turn themselves into planet-destroying gods, or they suffer severe brain damage. These two folks are probably just lost forever now. But suddenly, we're in the Lifestream itself, or some sort of strange place. Tifa is here, and all she sees is Cloud and several gates to... what? Ugh, this must be Cloud's memory. We're locked into whatever terrible mind palace Cloud's inside right now, a place where the empty shell is trying, in vain, to search for himself and find out who he really is. Maybe though, just maybe, Tifa can help. And you should sit tight for this part, as it's perhaps the most important one of the whole game. First, we try to go back to 5 years ago. We see Sephiroth enter Nibelheim and talk to someone. Cloud? No, we know that's not true. Cloud wasn't there 5 years ago. Tifa did wait for Cloud, but he never came. Instead, it was that guy with the spiky black hair. Tifa's known this ever since the story from Kalm, but she was much too afraid of what would happen if she said anything. In any case, we're not quite ready to go back here yet. We need to go back earlier. What about the well? You remember that flashback from all the way back in 7th Heaven? It's still much the same thing. Cloud wanted to join Soldier. And Tifa does remember this. It wasn't all just made up. A person named Cloud called her to the well. That happened. But is that really all we've got? Again, this could just be Cloud taking on Tifa's memories. Hell, it was Tifa who brought this scene up in the first place, wasn't it? We need something more. Young Cloud appears all of a sudden, and talks of a new memory, one that's locked deep inside of Cloud, that he's never mentioned before. Tifa herself doesn't even know much about it. We go through another gate and find ourselves at Tifa's house, with Tifa surrounded by her friends and looking rather upset. We see Cloud come in to visit and find a bit more truth. Despite living next to each other, Tifa and Cloud weren't ever incredibly close. Cloud thought all of these other people were a bit arsey, though he regrets that now. Still, he wanted to see Tifa. And this day was memorable for another reason. Turns out this day was when Tifa's mother died, hence the sadness. Tifa goes off in search of her mother in Mount Nibel, of all places. We find ourselves at the bridge which, guess what, has never been all that safe. Tifa tries to cross, her friends decide against it, but Cloud tries to cross too, and the bridge snapped. Cloud got by with a few scrapes, but Tifa nearly died, and Cloud, alas, was blamed for what happened. So, Cloud ended up becoming a bit of a tough. He thought Tifa hated him and resolved to join Soldier just to get noticed. It was also Senpai could notice him. For Tifa's part, she never hated Cloud. And indeed, she thought about him a lot over the years, wondering if she would find an article about him in the paper. And that's why she waited for him that day. But the most important thing to note here is that this is Cloud's memory, not Tifa's. We're getting somewhere. Maybe now, we're ready to go back to that event, when Sephiroth came to town. Still, if Cloud wasn't there, how could he know about any of this? That's the question. We end up back at the reactor, where we see Sephiroth slash Tifa. Then, the man with the black hair and big sword comes rushing up the steps. What are we missing with him? Ah, that's right. A name. Suddenly, Cloud remembers it. Tifa knew it all along, but wanted Cloud to remember himself. This is Zack. Yes, Aeris' ex-boyfriend, who we found out a little about in his hometown of Gongaga. Zack does what we saw Cloud do. He rushes into the Genova room. Shortly afterwards, he goes flying right out again. Whoever it was, Zack or Cloud, they sure as hell didn't win any kind of battle with Sephiroth. But then, there's another figure. Someone in basic Shinra uniform, mask and all. The figure picks up Zack's sword, runs up the stairs and straight into the Genova room, where he stabs Sephiroth in the back, taking revenge for the town of his birth. So you ask how Cloud could know about any of this if he wasn't there? Well, the answer's simple. Cloud was there all the time. He did keep the promise. He did fight with Sephiroth, and he won. It's just that, well, he never got into Soldier. When Sephiroth asked about someone's hometown, he wasn't talking to Zack. He was talking to Cloud, inside his regulation uniform and mask. He was ashamed and didn't want to show his face. But he was there, and he took revenge. Still, despite being stabbed in the back, Sephiroth wasn't quite dead yet. We see him limp down the steps, with Jenova still in his hand. Cloud sets Tifa down, and the wounded Zack tells Cloud to finish Sephiroth off. Sephiroth stabs Cloud, and then, well, Cloud just lifted Sephiroth up and threw him into the Lifestream. He must have been some sort of major badass after all. Back in the Lifestream, all the Cyclocks are now broken. All the different Clouds come together to form a whole, a full, actual person who is back again and who recognises Tifa. So now, well, we probably ought to get out of here before anything else. And so we do, finally washing up on the shores of the utterly ruined Midgar. We're a little beaten, but, well, we're okay. Back on the Highwind, Cloud explains himself to the rest of the group. So of all we know about him, what's actually true? Well, most of it, really. We know that Cloud wasn't created entirely 5 years ago, but we know that he was certainly experimented on and injected with Jenova cells after Nibelheim. Hojo wasn't lying about that. We know that he was too ashamed to admit that he hadn't been good enough for Soldier, but the process of injecting him with Jenova cells and the Mako exposure, presumably during said experiment, gave him the strength and the appearance of having been in Soldier, and those same cells drew him towards Sephiroth. But we know that he was actually a person, and that he did kill Sephiroth 5 years ago. In one glorious moment, it turns out that our main protagonist was, in the end, just a simple, cliched RPG grunt. That's one of my favourite moments story-wise, as it happens. And of course, Cloud is kind of responsible for that big fin floating in the sky. And needless to say, he's gonna damn well stop it. It's just like what Barret says, there ain't no getting off of this train we're on. We've got some short analysis this time, because we are close to the finish. We'll start with Cloud. The plot of FF7 does get pretty hefty in Disc 2, and it can be quite difficult to follow. A lot of that has to do with how the game completely breaks down Cloud, our main guy. Usually, when you add some vulnerability to a character, there's at least something left behind. Well, not so here. FF7 tears Cloud into absolutely nothing and then rebuilds him. Not only was he controlled by Sephiroth, but he was a failed experiment, created 5 years ago. He didn't even have a name. It's a difficult step to take, especially once everything does come back together. You think back to the flashback in Kalm, compare it to the Lifestream and Sephiroth's visions. What if all of this is actually true? The flashback is an odd duck for sure, especially because there are, annoyingly, some plot holes there. One could ask how Cloud would know about Sephiroth going mad in the first place, or how he came to remember talking with Sephiroth in the basement of the Shinra mansion. But then maybe this is a part of the Jenova cells, merging with Zack's memories as they did with Tifa's. There's one final piece of the puzzle we're still missing here, that being what happened after the Nibelheim incident, which we'll get to in the final part. The best thing about this rebuilding though is how it fits back into FF7's examination of RPG cliches. It turned out that Cloud was just a grunt all this time, exactly the same as, say, the very first enemies we fought in the game. There's some hints to this in the Kalm flashback too. Think back to the first time we see Sephiroth fight and how comparatively weak Cloud is to him. Considering that he was a first-class soldier, you'd expect him to be a lot stronger than this, even if he wouldn't be as strong as Sephiroth. The point of the scene is to convey Sephiroth's strength, but the information you need to read Cloud as a grunt and not a soldier is hidden in plain sight. The rebuilding features some pretty crazy callbacks too, such as the line where Cloud describes how he escaped from falling off the bridge with Tifa with skinned knees. That calls back to this line, Cloud's very first inner dialogue with what turns out to be Jenova from all the way back in Midgar, just before he meets Aeris. This whole scene is one of the many reasons why it's so rewarding to play through the game a second time, as you notice the hints that were there, that the information was always available to you, but it's a puzzle that you needed to figure out. It's also nice that after rediscovering himself and finding out his truth, Cloud largely goes back to the role he's always had, that of being our leader, although the group dynamic has changed. If anything, people have to remind Cloud that it's a team effort, because he zones right in on finally taking down Sephiroth once and for all. His relationship with certain characters also takes on a different hue, particularly, of course, his relationship with Tifa, but we'll get to that a bit later. For now though, we shall leave Cloud behind. He's certainly a more interesting hero than the norm. A lot of the times the hero's just someone who exists to bounce off the livelier and more interesting supporting cast. But Cloud is different. As far-reaching and as grandiose as the story in FF7 is, it's still quite contained, and it is still in many ways Cloud's story. And he's a strong enough character to sustain it, a lot stronger than some people give him credit for. Next up, let's look at one of the most memorable things about the whole game, the music. Nobuo Uematsu's soundtrack is just always on point throughout the whole game. There's so many wonderful moments in the soundtrack, too many to list all of them, but I'll pick out a few of my favourites. Anxious Heart, the first theme you hear after the opening Reactor mission, and it's so bare. It sums up the desolation of the Midgar slums, totally. It's even quite pretty in places, but there's always something bubbling under. Or there's something that's been lost, like there's a few instruments missing. But it couldn't possibly need any more. It also does a good job of summing up Cloud's character. It's worth noting that every other character in the game has a specific theme, with the exception of Cloud, and this usually doubles up as his theme. Oppressed People is the music you hear in Wall Market, and by God it's just so funky and sleazy, with the most awesome bassline. Hell, there's awesome basslines throughout the soundtrack. There's Bombing Mission, Under the Rotting Pizza, Cosmo Canyon, Wutai. It's a great game for basslines. Dear to the Heart isn't exactly a famous bit of music from the soundtrack, but it's really quite pretty and low-key. I love the reverse sweeps of strings at the beginning. Then you have Genova, this track. This one probably has the best bassline of all, actually. It's quite possibly the best boss theme in the game, even over the one track I can't really mention yet because it's to do with the final boss. If I were to pick another theme that's quite underrated on the soundtrack, I would actually go for Corel Prison. Bare, languid, very westerny to boot, definite favourite of mine. Of course you've got Listen to the Cries of the Planet, the theme of the Forgotten Capital. Just creepy as all hell. The choirs, the little plucks here and there, and of course that unforgettable synth melody. Everything about that is foreboding. It makes every hair on my body stand to attention. I really don't need to say a whole lot about Aeris' theme, other than it's one of the saddest, most beautiful pieces of video game music ever written, even if, yeah, it is not necessarily the most original one. Who Am I? If there's one thing I love in a soundtrack, it's a big, grungy 80s synth, and that one's just full of it. Of course you've got A Reunion. Christ, how many of these tracks are just utterly creepy as hell? Reunion doesn't even try to sound ominous. It's almost not the sort of theme you'd want to put in the Northern Cave, but it just is. As far as all the character themes go, I would have to say that no character theme is better than that of the Captain himself. Cid's theme is just heroic, to an almighty degree. And when it comes to town themes, well, we actually haven't visited this place, at least in the video yet, but I love the Wutai theme. Most would probably pick Cosmo Canyon, but this one just edges it out for me, purely for the beat and the flute. And of course there is that one track we can't really talk about yet. Any final encounter needs a suitably epic final theme, and FF7 sure as hell delivers. As far as general comments go, I love that Nobuo Uematsu actually decided not to go for real instruments. He certainly could have, and having a proper orchestra and the like would have certainly fit into the game's super high production value. The songs from FF7 certainly do sound terrific when played on real instruments. But sticking with synths and sampling and the like makes the actual soundtrack stick out a lot more. There's barely a note of the soundtrack that's out of place. It's an absolutely stunning work, and the game wouldn't be the same without it. Is it Uematsu's best? Well, quite possibly. He's clearly one of the best video game music composers around, and this is right from when he was at his peak. I couldn't picture any scene from the game without the appropriate music backing it. It's pretty close to flawless. Okay, we're nearly finished with character examination, but we still have a few bits to fill, including the optional characters. And we'll start with my favourite, the bloodthirsty Wutai princess herself, Yuffie, who is pretty much the kid of the party, always getting herself into scrapes and irritating the rest of them. But yeah, I quite like Yuffie's character. She kind of functions a lot of the time as the player's voice, in a way, the person who says, "Can you believe all this that's going on?" And I like that. FF7 does get pretty crazy after all, and it's always nice to have Yuffie around to add a little bit of brevity. She's great as the group's outsider. And she's pretty damn useful in combat too. I favour Yuffie as the long-range character over Barret, mainly because she's quite a bit better with magic. She does love materia, after all. And then, of course, there's her ultimate weapon, which we'll get to pretty soon. Once she gets that, she can just about tear through anything. Yuffie's side quest and character story, which we haven't actually got to yet, is also a hell of a lot of fun. I like to have a group of 3 very capable and very brassy badasses, and Yuffie's pretty much a constant from discipline right on. And then, yeah, there's Vincent. I do get Vincent for the sake of completion, and he certainly has a bit more of a connection to the plot than Yuffie does, what with Lucretia being Sephiroth's real mother and whatnot. Still, I just don't like the character. He never seems to do too much aside from spout lots of depressingly gothic one-liners and the like. And I wouldn't normally be against that, but it does become a bit of a cliche with him, like there's not a whole lot there aside from that. Maybe though, this is all because I just don't use him that much. Vincent doesn't fit well into my style because he never seems to hit all that hard. He's got weird limit breaks as well that change his character into an uncontrollable beast. Sometimes they can be useful, but other times, if they come at the wrong time, his berserk monster can frickin' start healing enemies. There's basically never any space for Vincent in my party as a result. He just stands there on the Highwind, injecting a comment whenever I go up to him, which isn't often. Still, a lot of people do like Vincent. He even got a spin-off game, which was apparently terrible, but hey-ho. How come Vincent gets a spin-off, for heaven's sake? Where's my Cid game or Yuffie game? That would be much more fun. Oh, and his character theme is awesome. There's just not much else I can say about him. He's just always just been Vincent. So how does the ideal party come together? FF7 is actually kind of weird in that because there's so much variety in what you can roll with, the ideal party never seems to end up being the same. For example, it was only by chance that Cid ended up becoming a constant in this one. I threw a champion belt on him to maximise his physical powers, and suddenly he became a monster. Usually, the same role would have been taken by Red 13, who I use quite a lot, but kinda got relegated to the sidelines here. Barret kind of suffered a similar fate too. I figured out just how powerful Yuffie could be on a previous playthrough, and from then on I always used her as my go-to long-range character. And then there's the others who just don't really get used much. Vincent, Cait Sith, and Tifa. Tifa actually does have the potential to do major damage, but I guess I've never really explored it much. Cait Sith is just weird, but he certainly does have a couple of upsides. We'll see a pretty big one in the final part. And I almost never use Vincent, although he's the only character that just doesn't have any upside at all for me. Really, the only constants throughout my usual playthroughs of FF7 is that Cloud will be in the party, because obviously he's got to be there, and that Aeris will also be in the party throughout Disc 1. That's it really. One of the fun parts of playing this RPG is that I still have a lot of different ways of playing the game that I've never really looked into, and that would change the way I approach the game dramatically. If I tried to roll with Tifa and Cait Sith, for example, they can both break the game in many different ways. Even now, there's still things to discover when playing the game. Even though it is kind of easy, it's great to experiment with, like a big RPG sandbox. Right, let's look at Tifa properly. We haven't done so yet because, well, the game hasn't really given us much of a chance. It's only in Disc 2 where Tifa really comes to the forefront. Before that, all we could figure out was that she was Cloud's childhood friend and that she was hiding something huge, and once that came out, all hell broke loose. Tifa, by game's end, turns out to be a complex character, and the relationship she has with Cloud is pretty deep. She tries to present herself as someone who wanted to protect Cloud, who knew that something was very wrong, but the truth seems to be that Tifa wanted to protect Cloud so that he could protect her. She needs that protection more than anything else. Tifa and Cloud are both quite broken in their own ways, with Tifa's foibles being emotional. Going back to the theme of loss, particularly of parental guidance, it seems like Tifa is the most affected by that, on a very human and relatable level. She lost something dear to her as a child, and she spent the following years looking for that blanket again. Perhaps in this instance, Tifa acts as an avatar for the author? If you go right the way through the looking glass of the loss theme, that is. Tifa's journey is all about searching for Cloud, and in doing so searching for someone who can guide her. A lot of times it is presented somewhat like a love thing, but I reckon there's a little bit more to it than that. Even when it appears that Tifa has some unrequited feelings for Cloud, are they born out of love or just out of care? It'll all become clear soon enough, I suppose, as we start to get to the finish. Right, let's do this. It's the final lap. You ready? Go. Now that Cloud's back in town, our first mission takes us straight to Junon and another bit of huge materia, inside of an underwater reactor. Cloud's been away too long and, yeah, we missed him a little, didn't we? We certainly missed his ass-kicking powers, that's for sure. The dungeon itself's a fairly straightforward reactor, with a couple of weird enemies and a lot of soldiers to be put to the sword. And finally, a rather tricky boss fight at the end. Carry armour hits hard, can remove members of the party, and can end the game of anyone who hasn't prepared themselves. But yeah, we came prepared. Still, he thwarts us long enough for the huge materia to get away inside a red submarine. So we take off in hot pursuit. There's a nice touch here. The Shinra guards in the sub are the same people we encountered way back in Disc 1, when Cloud was cosplaying as a regular grunt for all those minigames, and we're allowed to just take them hostage, as opposed to killing them. Anyway, here's the submarine minigame. And there goes the submarine minigame. Don't know if they really thought this one through. Hey ho, never mind. The upshot of this all is that we now have a sub, so we can explore underwater, which we'll certainly be doing in a bit. For now though, there's a more pressing matter. The last bit of huge materia is on its way to Rocket Town via plane. We rush back, but alas, we don't make it in time. So we take off in the Highwind in hot pursuit, making it just as the rocket's about to lift off. More Shinra guards get bodied, and we get to fight Rude as well. He's no match for us now. We make it to the rocket, but, well, Sid loses focus on the mission at hand. After all, he always wanted to be in space, so naturally he starts commanding the crew. And of course, he badmouths She-Ra because, well, forget it, it's Sid. And then Palmer, the dickhead, goes ahead and launches the rocket. Finally, Shinra's space program did something. And we're on a collision course with Materia. So, looks like the game's over. Ah, not so fast. You don't think Sid wouldn't have set up an escape pod for something like this, would you? Of course he did. Before we leave, we have to take the huge materia as well, which we do by entering a code. There's hardly any clues to figure this out, but it is easy enough to do through the process of elimination. Anyway, time to get out of Dodge. But as we do, an oxygen tank explodes, trapping Sid. Bugger. It appears to be the end for our precious captain. And yeah, it's the same oxygen tank She-Ra was working on years ago. Sid realises that she was right the whole time and that he probably wouldn't be here at all if she hadn't stayed to work on that tank. Fortunately, she's also here now, and she can help free Sid from the tank. Finally, Sid stops treating She-Ra like an arsehole. Hooray! And also, he managed to live out his dream. He's in space, and we're going back home. But what about the rocket? The world wishes it on as it gets closer and closer. Bugenhagen looks on in his observatory. There's a massive white light as it hits. And as the light fades, we see that it did some damage, but not nearly enough. Meteor heals itself, and all the crumbs come back. The calamity is still in the skies, and Shinra's plan failed. Therefore, yep, we're totally screwed. Back on the Highwind, there's, not a massive amount to say. Perhaps we should just screw around a bit. Hell, there's little point in doing much else. So we fly around and see how the world's coping. And the answer is, yeah, not very well. Even the Shinra scientists at Nibelheim are crapping themselves. Just for kicks, we head off into that old Shinra mansion, and suddenly, we're thrust into a flashback. This is some time after the whole Nibelheim incident, after the rebuilding of the town. A scientist goes to check on a couple of tanks in the corner, but suddenly they open, and he gets punched out by Zack. Zack quickly opens the other tank and rescues Cloud. Zack seems okay, but Cloud's looking a little worse for wear, like he's had quite a few experiments performed on him. Zack and Cloud get the hell out of Dodge and hitch a ride on a truck. Cloud's kind of out of it, but Zack talks a lot about his plans for the future. Ultimately, he decides that he's going to become a mercenary. 'Cause, well, why not? You're an ex-soldier on the run, you've got a big sword on your back. If life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Ultimately, Cloud and Zack find themselves on the outskirts of Midgar, getting ready to head into town, when suddenly, Zack is shot by a group of Shinra soldiers, who quickly surround him and finish him off. They decide not to bother with the semi-conscious Cloud. As they leave, Cloud crawls over to his fallen friend and picks up his sword. So yeah, this is the last bit of the puzzle, how Cloud came to assume that ex-soldier identity, how he and Zack escaped from Hojo's experiments, and how Zack met a rather tragic, senseless end. Of course, if you want a lot more detail about this, you can go ahead and play Crisis Core, which is one of the worthwhile portions of FF7's extended universe. For few reasons other than sheer bloody-mindedness, we go off to Bone Village and dig for treasure. We find something odd there though, a key to Sector 5. Turns out that this will allow us access back into Midgar. We can't do a hell of a lot there, although there are a couple of cool things to pick up. And hey, it's always nice to revisit Wall Market again. But when we go into the church, we're greeted by a strange vision. Oh my god, Aeris is there! Naturally we rush forward after rubbing our eyes, but she disappears. The kids there even ask where the flower girl went off to. Still, this scene. God only knows how many posts about how it was possible to revive Aeris this one scene spawned. I've heard that it's actually little more than a glitch, but it certainly comes at a rather inopportune time. And of course, we should also check out our new toy. Obviously the first thing we do is go back to the red submarine and pick up that huge materia, which we do. And then wait, what's that weird fin moving around? Yeah, maybe we should go and have a look. And then, oh my Christ! Behold the monster that strikes fear in all players of the game. This is the Emerald Weapon, and this is what it does to those who bump into it. Emerald Weapon has 1,000,000 HP, not an exaggeration, and does horrifying damage with every single attack. Depending on how much materia you've got equipped, this monster can hit you with the frickin' damage cap. If you bump into it without being prepared, well, guess what? You're dead. And we are not prepared. We even have frickin' Cait Sith in our party for some reason. We are screwed. There's no hope. Wait a minute. What? What? That actually just happened. Did you know that Cait Sith slots can potentially insta-kill any enemy in the game, including this frickin' weapon? And it just did. I didn't cheat to save scum or anything. Honestly. Okay, maybe I did. Do you want to spend 20 hours raising a gold chocobo? Because I really don't. So, yeah, Emerald Weapon is dead. It dropped something called an Earth Harp? It's worthless. What a Swiss. But yeah, Cait Sith has most definitely redeemed himself now. Now just please don't kill me. Also while underwater, we happen across this place. Turns out the plane that shipped the huge materia to Rocket Town didn't make it home. This is its wreck. The plane's called the Gelnica, and it's home to quite a lot of loot. And another battle with Reno and Rude, who so happen to be here because they want the loot for themselves. Yeah, like that'll happen. It's also home to a lot of very strong enemies, and as such it's my go-to place for levelling up in the late game. Yuffie also gets her ultimate weapon here, making her a bloodthirsty monster on the same level as our almighty Cid. Then again, maybe not. Back in Rocket Town, Cid got his ultimate weapon, making him the psychotic captain of hell. On the Gelnica, I smiled with pride as our Lord and Master, Cid Highwind, became the first member of our party to hit the damage cap. So with that, the main party is complete. Many a successful FF7-1 is based on hours of brutal training here in the Gelnica, I promise you that. Cloud, Cid and Yuffie will tear anything apart, they're unstoppable. Hell, Cloud's even kind of lagging behind these two at the moment, although that won't last. Speaking of Yuffie, why don't we go west, to her hometown? We don't have much better to do. As we hit the island though, Yuffie pops up, acting all strange. Then some Shinra soldiers ambush us. Huh? After winning the fight, we find out that Yuffie has stolen all of our bloody materia. This isn't exactly what we want to be doing right now, but we've got to chase her. And so we do, to the only town on the continent, a sunny, rather exotic place called Wutai, the classic feudal Japan-themed town, pretty much. It's worth noting that Wutai went to war with the Shinra a few years back, the event where Sephiroth made his name, where Elmira's husband died and so on. Since then, it's pretty much just a stagnant resort town. Still, it's a nice place. Even the Turks are here, freshly recovered from having their arses kicked at the Gelnica. Cause hey, it's not like this footage was obviously recorded an age ago or anything and I could only fit it in now. Anyway, they're not exactly pleased to see us, seeing as they're on holiday. They have no desire to fight us, which is just as well, seeing as we have materia to find. Eventually we do find Yuffie, who tries to tell us a sob story. But of course, it's all rubbish, and she runs off again. The second time we find her, turns out she's been captured, but not by the Turks. Of all people, it's frickin' Don Corneo, that pimp from all the way back in the Wall Market. Plus he's got Elena too. And so that's how our party and the Turks end up, unofficially at least, joining forces. Or at least, we're not going to bother each other. Corneo is, of course, as unpleasant as ever, especially when you consider that Yuffie's basically a teenager. You just want to smack the bastard around. But of course, he has another pet for us. Raps is a hell of a lot harder than apps, especially with no materia. Sadly for the pet though, I so happen to have Meteor Rain. Fun's over. Still, Corneo is unbowed, and now resolves to just kill his captives instead. But then, the Turks come storming in. This is one of the better moments in the game for the Turks at least, as they take care of the Don in their own special way. Nothing personal, strictly business. Speaking of business, as far as we're concerned, they're still on vacation. And so, all's well again, Yuffie gives us our materia back, and she's still going to ride with us because, well, we don't have a choice to be honest. But we're not quite done here yet. Seems like we barely visited the town in all honesty, and it is a nice place. Why don't we stay a little longer? If we go to the big pagoda in the north of the town, Yuffie can take a bit of a test. She can test her strength by fighting everyone in the pagoda. Yeah, they're cocky enough, but, well, I guess they don't know much about what the Conformer can do. Jesus Christ, Yuffs. After the massacre's over, we get to the top floor where we fight... Oh, holy crap! It's Yuffie's dad. The boss of the town, in other words. Now this should be a really hard fight, huh? No, not really. It might have been if it was earlier in the game, but not now. Yuffie's rightly pissed off at them for both shaming Wutai and not being even 1,000th of a percentage point as bloodthirsty and as badass as she is. Goddo resolves to restore the town's reputation and make Wutai great once again. Yeah, okay, whatever. It's a nice sentiment. Or at least it would be if that pesky meteor wasn't going to kill us all. And we still have no idea what we're going to do. But then Red 13 gets an idea. Why don't we go visit his grandpa? Hell, Bugenhagen knows a little bit about the planet, so if anyone's got even half of a clue, it might just be him. It's certainly a cunning and subtle plan, and hey, we aren't doing bugger all else. Off we go to visit the old coot who flies around a lot. Bugenhagen asks us to look into our hearts to find something that we can cling on to. But we don't really have anything. Indeed, it seems like we're all focused on something that isn't there, that being Aeris. We still miss her. But then Cloud thinks about Aeris's plan. She said she was the only one who could stop Meteor. Why did she go to the Forgotten Capital on her own? She was the only one who had a plan, and we need to find out what that plan was. So we need to go back there. Bugenhagen's pretty excited about the whole thing. He's going to come with us, in fact. Just what we need. While we're here, we also deposit the huge Materia in the observatory. Seems like the best place for it at the moment. After all, the group's not exactly the best at holding on to Materia. Anyway, we're back here again. And no, things haven't got any less creepier since the last time. Boogan ho-ho-hos his way into a giant crystal, and there he finds something. We must search for something called Holy, the ultimate white magic. The only thing that can possibly stop Meteor. If there's a black Materia, then it stands to reason that there must be a white. But where is Holy? Of course, it was in Aeris's ponytail. It dropped into the sea when she was stabbed. So, it's gone. We're still doomed. Or are we? It's clear now what Aeris was doing here. She was praying for Holy to come. But how can we access it? Hell, even if we could, would we even be able to use it? Only the ancients can wield this power, and there isn't any of them around anymore. But Boogan finds something else. Ancient writings that he can't make out. They speak of a key that exists in a place sunlight can't reach. One scientist, Lord only knows who, made that much out. And so, we have to go on a quest to solve this riddle. If it's a place where sunlight can't reach, then, well, it's got to be underwater, surely. And so, off we go in the submarine. We found ourselves going down a passage where, yeah, we find it. It's not the hardest of riddles, to be sure. The key is for a music box, and Boogan is quite overjoyed as he places it in the hole and sees the wisdom of the ancients spew forth. We must now go inside this wisdom, where we find an image. Once again, we see what happened. Aeris praying for Holy, the Materia falling, and then we see the Materia at the bottom of the ocean. It's glowing pale green. It's active. Aeris did what she had to do. She successfully prayed for Holy. She'd always intended to come back to us. Maybe she was going to tell Cloud that everything was ready. But Sephiroth stopped her, and he's still stopping us now. The power of Sephiroth prevents Holy from being set free and destroying the meteor. As ever, the solution is to stop Sephiroth. But how? He rests in that impenetrable cave, laughing. As we leave the capital, we get a call from Cait Sith. Shinra didn't rest up after we screwed them over. They moved that massive cannon over from Junon to Midgar, where they intend to use the city's Mako supplies to fight Sephiroth and presumably destroy Meteor in the process by, reasons. This probably isn't going to do Midgar a whole lot of good. And then, the weapon rises again. Diamond Weapon rises out of the sea and heads straight towards Midgar. Cait Sith is going nuts at this point. We can't let Shinra do this. We can't let the weapon attack the city. It's all crazy, enough for him and Barret to have a bit of a row. Still, we know what Shinra are like, so we can't exactly rely on them. Off we go to beat the weapon ourselves. It's not an easy battle, but we do give it a bloody nose. After a few stabs, the weapon decides to retreat for now. But while we've been fighting it, Shinra has readied the cannon, this fin that they call the Sister Ray. The cannon fires. Diamond fires on the town as the massive beam of Mako rips straight through him. Chalk off another weapon then. But the beam is still moving. It blasts the northern crater's barrier and... it was enough. The barrier is gone. The crater is open. Finally, Shinra did something. But still, Diamond's parting shot has an effect. Rufus looks on as a wave of energy smashes into his office window. We fly over to the northern crater to confirm what happened. There is no barrier. We could go down there and fight Sephiroth right now. But wait, Cait Sith has more news. The Shinra's in crisis and the president is presumably dead. Is that all? Oh no, there's worse. Someone has taken control of the cannon's mainframe. Of all people, it's Hojo. Hojo decides that he can't let Sephiroth's plan to destroy the world be interfered with. Mako is needed to repair the barrier, and he's going to give him all the Mako he needs. At this point, the edifice crumbles once more. The group figures out, at last, that Cait Sith is Reeve. They also find out that they simply can't shut off the reactors. If they did, where would all the Mako go? It would be released, somewhat violently, and the explosion would destroy Midgar. Cait Sith can't let that happen. So yeah, we have to go in. Scarlet and Heidegger appear to have figured things out too, and place Reeve under arrest. They'll deal with everything themselves, particularly Cloud and company. Looks like we're going back home. We decide to arrive in style. If we can't get to the cannon through the slums, we're going to parachute in from the Highwind. 'Cause that's what we do, pretty much. Once we're on the ground, we need to go under to try and avoid Shinra's troops. Sure, there's resistance down here, but not quite as much. But we do end up running into the Turks. It's kind of an odd moment, really. They have their orders, but they don't necessarily want to carry them out. We could just let them go, to be honest, especially after Wutai. But nah, they're Shinra. We go easy on them though, as usual, wounding them just enough so that they go away to an uncertain fate. After making our way through the subway system, we find ourselves up top, ever close to the cannon, and we get another encounter. Gyahaha and Kyahaha sit at the helm of a gigantic machine called the Proud Clod, which they're going to use to squash us. Yeah, if it wasn't obvious before that the Shinra are just mad idiots who don't have their priorities straight, it's pretty freaking obvious now. Anyway, it's another machine that's built to destroy weapons. Crap! Or not. And with these two, we are not so merciful. Proud Clod explodes, presumably taking Scarlet and Heidegger with it. They will not be missed. And so we go up the ladders and the stairs, until at long last, we meet up with Hojo. So why is Hojo doing this? Why is he so insistent on the destruction of the planet? It's simple. He thinks he's Sephiroth's dad. He took him just after he came out of the womb. He raised him to become a super soldier. He completed Professor Gast's Genova project, and indeed, he's now injected Genova cells into his body. I guess that means we've got to fight. Hojo has 3 forms, the latter 2 of which are thoroughly disgusting abominations. He sure as hell likes his chemicals, and he can throw tons of status effects at us. Still, all the chemicals in the world can't stop him from being a simple scientist. So, he falls. Hojo is dead. I think Sid sums things up best. And with that, Scarlet and Heidegger are dead. Hojo is dead. Rufus is presumably dead too. The Shinra is no more. We've successfully completed our hostile takeover, folks. And now it's time to erase their mistake. Because after all, none of this would have happened if it weren't for the Shinra. Meteor is set to fall in 7 days. If we can't stop it, then the lights are going to go out. With this in mind, Cloud decides to let the group go off on their own. All of them need to find something, a reason to fight, and a reason to live. For such a messed up individual, he isn't too bad at the old motivational speech. Everyone in the group can take a bit of time, and if they don't find a reason, if they choose not to come back, it's okay. No, seriously, Cloud won't hunt you down or anything. And so, everyone leaves the Highwind. Everyone except Cloud and Tifa. Because, well, neither of them have anyone. There's no Sector 7, no Nibelheim, no nothing. All they've got is each other. Cloud and Tifa park the Highwind and have a heart-to-heart. Will the rest of them come back? Oh yeah, of course. I'm sure they will. Probably. If not, we'll damn well just have to do it ourselves, won't we? Cloud and Tifa think back to all that's happened, particularly back to the Lifestream. They wonder if the stars know how hard they're fighting, and if anything's really changed at all, how much they've learned from each other along the way. And throughout this, they know that they have each other. All the way along, Cloud was searching for Tifa, and Tifa was searching for Cloud. Hell, everyone was searching for Cloud. Finally though, they found each other, and regardless of all that happened in the past, that's the most important thing now. But, well, they don't need to talk to each other to know. Fade to black. When we return, it's dawn. The moment can be stretched out, 1 second after the other, each one never to be repeated, but it's still time. And, well, as it happens, they're the only ones there. Cloud is philosophical about it, because they have each other, at the very least, and if they're going to go down fighting, so be it. So we're back on the Highwind for final preparations, to walk into the Valley of the Shadow of Death. When all of a sudden, the plane starts moving. Cloud and Tifa rush back just as everyone else starts filing in. Hell, some of them were pretty much here the whole time. Yeah, Tifa is kind of embarrassed by this. But they all come back. Sid, Barret, Red, Cait Sith, even our depressed former Turk and bloody Wutai princess have joined us. And of course, she's still very much there. In spirit, at least. I wish the game would stop punching me in the gut with Aeris' theme. The Highwind enters superpowered mode, and we brace ourselves for the final battle. We're off to the North Cave to take down Sephiroth. One final disc change, and we're there. So, we're nearing the end now. The ladder's down, and we can now go to the final dungeon. But well, why don't we screw around a bit more? Sure, the meteor's going to hit in a couple of days, but so what? There's some final things to do, like go around and see how everyone's doing. We randomly go to Kalm again, where we find some guy who wants to go travelling. Weirdly, he's also looking for an Earth Harp. Ah, the thing we got back when I cheated to beat the Emerald Weapon. So we do a little trade. We give him this harp that's completely and totally useless to us, and he gives us a full set of mastered materia with every spell, summon and command in the game. What the hell? Where were you all this time, damn it? Didn't want to throw your gun in for the cause, huh? Oh well, we're ordered to the gills now, so we can go ahead and bother some more weapons. Ultima Weapon, the one that bothered us in Medial, is flying around in the sky, and we can have a few battles with him. I could try and hype him up, but honestly, Ultima Weapon is really easy now, even without all this crazy materia. The only thing that's annoying about the battle is waiting for him to stop flying so we can hit him again. For winning the battle, we get two things. Shadow Flare, an incredibly nasty enemy skill that is his only attack of note, and Cloud's ultimate weapon, imaginatively named Ultima Weapon, which finally allows him to do Cid scale damage. A short while after though, we spot this tiny little dot in the Gold Saucer Desert. Shall we bump into it? Why not? Shit. Now this is a different story. The last weapon in the game, the Ruby Weapon. Ruby Weapon has 700,000 HP, slightly less than Emerald, but that's negated by the fact that he is basically impervious to pain. He hits almost as hard, and he can make your party disappear. Every single attack comes with about 1,000 different status effects too. This guy's real scum, basically. Now I could do the whole cheating thing again, but I don't need to. We'll do this the old-fashioned way. So here's the strategy. Of course you start with two guys knocked out, so Ruby doesn't do it himself. Then you use a materia called W Summon that we won in the battle square. The first summon is Hades, which exploits Ruby's solitary weakness. It can be stopped. The second? Liss. Knights of the Round. This is the summon the developers put in for anyone having serious trouble with the game, as it's basically a one-hit kill for almost anything, doing tens of thousands of points of damage. The Mime command allows you to repeat this without spending tons upon tons of MP too. So you do this, as well as prepping Cloud up with elixirs whenever Ruby gets a hit in, and make sure you've got lots of status effect protection as well. It's a hard battle, but we won. And we get, a Desert Rose. Maybe the guy in Kalm has an interest in it. Turns out he does. And in return, he gives us a freaking gold chocobo. Now, I hate the massive chocobo breeding grind, and never do it, which is why I haven't covered it. But this is the end result of that. A chocobo that can go anywhere in the game, crossing mountains, rivers, oceans, the lot. This would allow you access to special caves where you would actually get materials like Mime, Quadra Magic, and indeed Knights of the Round. Anyway, the weapons are dead. No more will they be able to fly around destroying things. Meteor can do a perfectly fine job of that itself. Next up, Cosmo Canyon. Let's see how Bugen's doing, shall we? We arrive with Red in the party, but we're immediately told that Grandpa isn't well at all. He hasn't been the same since he got back from the Forgotten Capital. Nanaki rushes to see him, and the party leaves him alone for a quiet moment. Bugen talks about his long life. Nanaki doesn't want him to go, all that stuff. And after giving Nanaki one final memento, Bugen croaks out his last ho 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 and dies. He rejoins the party around the fire and says that, actually, Bugen's fine. He's fighting fit and on his way to another journey. I like this part actually. It's another comment on dealing with loss. Nanaki's reaction isn't grandiose, it's more like denial. Lastly, we take one final trip underwater and go down a long passage. When we surface, we find ourselves in a pool with a waterfall. And behind the waterfall is a mysterious figure. For this part, Vincent is required, as the figure so happens to be Lucretia, Vincent's one-time lover who he thought he'd lost years ago, and of course, the real mother of Sephiroth. We get a wordless sequence showing us what happened with Vincent as a Turk. We see how Hojo shot Vincent and experimented on him, and then see Hojo take Sephiroth away from Lucretia, hence why Hojo thought of himself as Sephiroth's father. So if Lucretia gave birth to him, then Vincent must be... perhaps, anyway. Lucretia is a soul in torment. She asks about her son, whether he's alive or dead. And Vincent deals with it in his own way, saying that Sephiroth has died. In doing so, at least he can put Lucretia's mind at rest. A bit later on, we return to the cave and find that she's gone. Returned to the planet, perhaps? She leaves Vincent's ultimate weapon and final limit behind. So we've wrapped his story up, at least. And indeed, we've now wrapped everyone's story up. There's nothing more left to do. All there is the final destination. We fly the Highwind to the north and lower it into the crater. It's time to end this. And so, welcome to the final dungeon. Our party's beefed up, but it's still quite a challenging place. Large, maze-like, and filled with some nasty enemies. Quite a few of them can even cause instant death, depending on where you're at. The music's also pretty awesome, as you would expect. And of course there's lots of loot to find. Even here in the final dungeon, there's some serious equipment to be found. About midway through, the group splits up and we can pick a path to go down. We end up choosing this rather languid place, where we find out, after all this time, that Cloud can swim. It's a beautiful locale to be sure, even if the enemies are vicious. Finally though, we arrive here, the entrance to the centre of the earth. The final armies of death are heading our way. It's time. It should be noted that at this point you could technically still go all the way back and leave the crater, but if you continue down, it's the point of no return. And we have nothing more to do, so what you got to say, Cloud? Let's mosey. Jesus wept. Thank you, Sid. Anyway, time for blood. Tough enemies line all these platforms, particularly the dragon zombie. That thing can certainly hit pretty hard, and also should give you your very last enemy skill, Pandora's Box. I love this bit though, the awesome lighting, the colours on display, and of course, the Jenova music. What do you think that means, huh? Yes, when we reach the centre, we get one last decisive battle with Jenova itself. Jenova Synthesis, by far the most disgusting creation of the lot. And actually the battle's incredibly easy, especially considering that I cheesed it with KOTR for reasons that will become clear later. Jenova falls in pretty short order in fact, the cause of the crisis is dead. But then the platform that we're on begins to crumble, and we all fall into the core of the planet, where he awaits. He who was in control all along, Sephiroth. And we can do nothing. He holds us all away, threatening to pull us apart. There's nothing we can do, we're putty in his hands. But the green light shines just behind him. Is it holy? If nothing else, it's a sign. Things can't end this way. Either we beat Sephiroth, or we die. And so, we push one final time, and at last, we are in battle. So, the final fight. This is Bizarro Sephiroth, the first form. You've got to knock both of his sides out, then knock out the torso, and then the core. It's a bit of a puzzler this fight, and it can be a bit of a bastard. But this is the final boss, so, you know, there's no holding back. Don't take a half measure when a full measure is what's needed. Our groups hit the monster with everything they've got. He has got a cack-ton of HP, partly because we used Knights of the Round against the last Jenova. I kinda wanted to make the battle as epic as possible, you know? Still, for all the pomp and circumstance, finally the monster crumbles and disappears. Is this the end? Have we won? We can still hear the cries of the planet. It's not over. And then? This is it. Safa Sephiroth. So you came here looking to fight a madman, and instead you found a god? If Bizarro wasn't a satisfying final boss, then, well, this one definitely is. Sephiroth's god form comes with one gigantic win, a background that looks like the edge of heaven, tons of HP, and some quite stunning attacks, all of which hit hard. and none more so than the most over-the-top attack in the whole game, Supernova. Sephiroth calls on the powers of Meteor, destroys every planet in the solar system, absorbs the entire frickin' sun, and then throws all of this and more straight at you. You dare to doubt his godhood now? And of course you've got that music, the marching time, the choral chants, the super bombast of the whole thing. Yeah, it's one of the most famous final boss themes ever, and for pretty good reason. It's a very satisfying battle, perhaps the hardest one you'll find outside of Emerald and Ruby, and it most definitely fits the bill. Hell, playing FF7 is almost like one long build-up, just to get a chance at playing out this battle again. There's no real strategy, to be honest, just throw everything at him, and we do. All the strongest magic, the biggest summons, and of course, Cid, until finally, after one last Ultima, Sephiroth explodes into light and disintegrates. We took on a god, and we won. And well, that's all we can do. The rest is in the hands of Holy. There are no more barriers to take down. For now, we must leave. But wait. Wake up. A flash of light. Cloud knows. He's still here. He's still inside. And he's still in control. Cloud collapses onto the ground as his psyche flies away. No more. This ends now. We go down a long tunnel to a blank space where Sephiroth stands ready. No massive winds, no colossal statues, just him and his sword. I guess Cloud probably goes over everything at this moment. What happened in Nibelheim, all the experiments, all that the Shinra did, and perhaps most of all, that moment in the Forgotten Capital. It all goes into one glorious moment where Cloud slices Sephiroth into ribbons. Sephiroth may have been stronger, he may well be the better soldier, but all Cloud needed was the self-belief, and he found it. At last, Cloud is free from Sephiroth. A hand reaches out. Is this the Lifestream again? Is that Aeris? No, it's Tifa. This place is kind of falling apart, and we really ought to get the hell out. Finally, we manage to get ourselves on a ledge where the rest of the group awaits. Cloud talks about the possibility of meeting her again, and the Highwind comes crashing down through the crater, ready to pick us up. It's all quite insane and chaotic as Holy releases itself at last, gushing out of the crater. Somehow we manage to get away. Meanwhile, in Kalm, we get to see Marlene. She looks out of the window and sees Meteor sink its claws into Midgar, tearing the city apart. All we can do is observe. What is to become of us? Holy reaches the Meteor and positions itself between Meteor and the city, absorbing the rock, or trying to, at least. But maybe we were too late. Meteor is still threatening to touch down. Holy isn't quite strong enough. Midgar is totally destroyed, with no hope and no refuge. And the planet will be next. But then, suddenly, the Lifestream starts poking up from the surface. It dances around in formation, the planet fighting back of its own accord. We can only look on as the Lifestream gradually dissolves Meteor, there is a blinding flash of white light, and the last thing we see is the first thing we saw. Aeris smiles as she finally returns to the planet. The credits roll. But, well, what happened? Meteor may have been destroyed, but what about the rest of us? Where do we stand in the planet's judgment? After the credits, we get one more scene. 500 years have passed. A group of animals run across the plains. They look strangely familiar. An older, grisly beast leads them, adorned with feathers and a rather impressive mane. It's Nanaki. He guides his cubs to a cliff's edge where they look upon a Midgar covered in green. The planet has regained control. And with that, the story ends. Game's over. All that's left is the series theme, the stars, and the reset button. So, that's it then. The story of Final Fantasy VII. A story that I've gone through a good few times now, and one that gives me just as much pleasure now as it did over 20 years ago. It's certainly not just down to nostalgia. Something about the game just makes it incredible to me. Even if not everything about the game works, there's just so much there. The best parts reach a level that just about no other games manage to attain. It was impossible to simply strip the game down into a few moments here and there, so I had to go through it all to experience everything. And every time, it's something special. It may be years before I pick the game up again. Hell, maybe I'll never play it all the way through again. I'll just leave it at that. Hey, here's a funny story. On my last playthrough of the game, 5 years or so ago, I never actually finished it. I was at the final boss with an impossibly strong party, literally toying with my prey, when Red 13 got confused and killed the party with an instant death /all. I actually wasn't even mad, but yeah, I never finished the game. So hey, it's nice to write that particular one. And it's nice to have taken people through this too. I always say something like this after I finish a ridiculous project, but I highly doubt I'll put as much into another review as I have this one, especially for a single game. It'll be a while anyway. Final Fantasy VII may have been done to death, but it's my favourite game of all time, and not just because it was my favourite game back in 1997. The fun parts, the sad moments, even the parts where the game does show its age, or it does something that you would frown upon, it's an experience unlike any other. You may well find RPGs that are technically better, or that have better stories, but I don't think any of them would match up to this where it counts, at least not for me. Right in the heart. It's that game. And as always, it's a pleasure. And so, it's time to finish. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've just ripped through all this in one go. Good on you. It's now probably time to go for something a little more relaxing, chilled out, and simpler. But who knows? A few years from now, Midgar might call again. Who can say? But it's time to end the video. So, as ever, wherever you are, whoever you be, have a good one, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.